Ned Stark watched the torchlight flicker on cold stone walls and wished for the true dark of the north. The Red Keep had never felt like home, but tonight it seemed a pit of vipers, every corridor another threat. Word had reached him. King Robert was breathing his last in the royal bedchamber, ravaged by a boar's tusk and too much wine. The king's guard hovered about him, as did maesters with their potions, and courtiers whispering in corners. Yet, in the shadow of that looming death, something unexpected had happened. Renly Baratheon had approached Ned with an offer, swift, decisive, perhaps traitorous to some. But in that moment, when the younger brother of the dying king stood before him in the gloom, Ned felt a stirring of possibility. He had refused Renly once. In another turn of the wheel, he would have named the man reckless. Yet somewhere in Ned's bones, in the memory of Robert's voice bellowing for action during the rebellion, he realized that inaction would kill them all. Renly's words had been simple. Seize Joffrey. Seize Cersei. Take control of the city. The alternative was to let the Lannisters orchestrate all from behind the Iron Throne. Ned thought of Catelyn's warning letters. He thought of Arya's talk of corridors and stolen swords, Sansa's fear of Joffrey, and the fact that Robert's children were no true Baratheons. He remembered Robert's own call for justice, at least the Robert he had known in the days before he drowned himself in wine and the illusions of power. Duty warred with honor in Ned's heart. There was only one correct course if it saved the realm from a Lannister stranglehold, if it shielded his daughters from the worst that might come. He whispered a prayer to the old gods and turned to Renly with solemn eyes, nodding his acceptance. The nights in King's Landing were never truly quiet. From his vantage, Ned could see torches bobbing along the city walls, hear the distant shouts in Flea Bottom. Even at the hour of the wolf, the metropolis refused to settle. Renly had chosen this time to act, when the Princess Myrcella and Prince Tommen would be Abed, when Cersei might be secure behind her locked doors, and when the gold cloaks were weary from the day's endless vigilance. But Renly had promised that many of those city watchmen owed him favors or gold, enough to tip the balance. Ned looked to his own guard, a handful of Northmen, men who'd taken an oath to die for him if need be. Among them stood Jory Castle's replacement, because Jory was already lost, stabbed and left to bleed by the Lannisters not long ago. The faces of his men were grim, set in that stony way that meant they would follow him through the seven hells if he commanded. They, too, believed in Ned Stark's sense of justice and duty, and they seemed to sense the moment was upon them. Renly had said quietly, "We strike first or the Lannisters strike us." There was no levity in his voice that night. Gone was the smiling, carefree brother who knew the power of charm. Renly Baratheon wore the resolute face of a man who believed he was saving the realm, or at least preserving some measure of stability. "Will you come?" he asked. "Will you stand with me, Lord Stark?" And Ned had answered, his voice like steel in the hush of the corridor. "We do this for Robert, and for the good of the kingdom." They went forth under moonlight. Renly commanded a small cohort of his personal guard, men with green stags emblazoned on their cloaks. They joined with a unit of gold cloaks, the watchmen already paid to stay loyal. Ned recognized some by face, though he'd not learned all their names. The tension was thick as they made their way through the labyrinth of the Red Keep, their bootfalls echoing over the stone floors. At Renly's direction, they split into two parties, one heading for the royal quarters, the other for the Queen's apartments. Ned was torn, wanting to face Cersei himself, but he had to see Robert one last time. He found the king's chambers attended by Ser Barristan Selmy, face lined with sorrow and duty, white cloak shimmering in the candlelight. The old knight caught sight of Ned, and a flicker of confusion crossed his features. But he did not draw his sword. He respected Ned Stark and the bond he'd once shared with Robert. "Ned," Ser Barristan said softly, as if even his voice might aggravate the king's wounds. "The king sleeps. The maesters say the poison from the boar's tusk. They do not believe he will last the night." Standing behind Ned was Renly, expression grim. "I would see my brother," the younger man said. "Ser Barristan, we mean him no harm." Barristan Selmy studied them both, especially the ring of armed men. He might have guessed the dire purpose behind their presence. But the old knight stepped aside, worn by grief, perhaps also by a sense that something was rotten in the state of King's Landing. "I'll allow you in," he said, "but mark my words. No blood is to be shed in this sacred place." Ned nodded, forging a solemn pact. The door to Robert's bedchamber opened on gloom, with only a few candles left to burn. Robert Baratheon lay beneath a heavy coverlet that bore the roaring stag. His face was swollen, marred by a raging fever. He smelled of sweat and sour wine, a faint tang of rot from the wound. Ned's heart clenched. This was not the man who'd soared with him over battlefields, a warhammer in his fists, fury blazing in his eyes. Nor was this the man who had roared triumph at the trident. This was a shell of the once proud warrior, undone by his own folly and a cunning boar's savage strength. Renly approached the bed first, dropping to one knee. "Brother," he whispered, His voice cracked, losing all that confidence that had guided him outside. "I did not want this." Robert's eyelids fluttered, perhaps recognizing the sound. Then his voice croaked, barely above a whisper. "Renly?" It sounded like the gasp of a man lost in a desert. Renly took his brother's hand, pressing it between his own. "We're here. Ned and I are here." Robert opened his mouth as if to speak further, but only a cough emerged. Blood flecked his lips, or perhaps it was the remnants of the honeyed wine the maesters had forced upon him. His eyes sought Ned, and for an instant, Ned felt that old bond rekindled. "Ned," came the hushed voice. My will." Ned recalled the paper he had drawn up at Robert's command, naming him protector of the realm. He had changed the words, however, substituting "my rightful heir" with something more ambiguous, lacking Joffrey's name. He'd done so out of a sense of righteousness, suspecting the boy's parentage. Now, kneeling at Robert's side, he said gently, "I have it, Robert. It's safe. I promise. I'll keep the kingdom for your son." A convulsion of breath rattled in Robert's throat. "My son," he echoed. "Yes, keep him safe." Then the king's eyes slid shut, and though his chest still rose, it was faint and sporadic. Ned glanced at Renly, sorrow churning inside him. They had no time to linger. Their moment to act had come and would soon pass. Ned signaled for his men to remain in the corridor, to keep a respectful guard. Ser Barristan stood near the door, shoulders slumped. He looked older than ever, as though he'd aged a decade this night. Outside, the gold cloaks they had mustered awaited their next command. Renly looked to Ned. "We must move. If Cersei or Joffrey hears Robert has breathed his last, they'll seize the throne before we can muster any power." "Then lead on," Ned murmured. Though a swirl of doubt threatened to stall him, he set his jaw. If they failed, they would be dead by dawn. Renly divided their forces again. They would approach Cersei's chambers from two directions, corner her, quietly if possible, but forcibly if necessary. With Robert's dying breath only a few doors away, time was fleeting. For all they knew, Littlefinger might already be spinning webs in the shadows, and Varys might be whispering secrets to both sides. Ned could only trust the men at his back, and his instincts. Stepping into the corridor leading to the Queen's rooms felt like walking into a nest of lion cubs. Each turn might bring guards loyal to Cersei, or members of the Kingsguard sworn to Joffrey. Every step was calculated, each corner scouted by an advance guard with flickering torches raised. The Red Keep's hush had grown absolute. No courtiers drifted through these halls now. No petty lords bickered in corners. Their world had narrowed to steel, stone, and the low thunder of hearts beating with fear and anticipation. They came upon a pair of Lannister household guards near the Queen's door, wearing crimson cloaks and lion sigils. "Halt!" one commanded, voice crackling with alarm, for never would they expect so many men armed with swords at this hour. He reached for his blade. Ned and Renly's men surged forward. Steel rang out, drowning the corridor in echoes. The Lannister guards fought with ferocity, but they were two against a well-drilled company. One fell with a cry, a sword driven into his belly. The other tried to retreat, shouting a warning. An arrow took him in the thigh and he dropped. Before he could scream further, one of the gold cloaks slammed a pommel into his temple. The corridor was quiet again, save for ragged breathing. A spark of remorse flickered through Ned. He had not wanted bloodshed in these halls. But this was no time for second-guessing. The men behind him forced the door, wooden panels cracking under the assault of booted feet and the weight of a heavy ram improvised from a bench. At last, the door burst inward. Inside, chaos erupted. Cersei Lannister stood in a night robe of black and gold, her hair unbound. Her eyes were wide with fury, and in her arms clung the young Prince Tommen, trembling. A few guards rushed forward, but they were quickly disarmed, outnumbered and caught by surprise. "You dare," Cersei hissed. She held Tommen behind her, though she looked more like a lioness ready to claw. "My husband is still king," Renly, breath quick, retorted. "He lies dying, my lady, and by his command, Ned Stark is protector of the realm." Cersei's gaze flicked between the men, full of hatred. "He is no protector. My son is heir." Ned stepped forward, voice low and resolute. "My lady, King Robert has named me regent until the rightful succession can be determined. I ask you to remain calm. No harm will come to you or your children, provided you do not resist." The Queen's eyes flared. "You have no idea what you do," she said through clenched teeth. "You think you can rip the throne from my family so easily? The Lannisters will not stand for this treachery." "You already committed treachery," Renly snapped, "conspiring against the king while he drew his last breath. This city is not yours to rule." Cersei looked around, calculating. Perhaps she searched for any sign of the Kingsguard, or for a loyal guard who might come bounding in to save her. But Ned's men had planned well. Silence reigned in the corridor, beyond the battered door. One of the gold cloaks gently took Prince Tommen's arm, pulling him away. Tommen looked on the verge of tears, confusion etched on his round face. Cersei lunged at the man who seized Tommen, but Renly stepped between them. "Enough," he said, tone sharper than Ned had ever heard. The younger Baratheon took control, carrying himself like a man who had already donned a crown in spirit if not in law. "We do not wish to harm the children, but they must remain under guard. The same goes for you, Cersei." Her glare was venomous enough to curdle milk. "You will pay in blood for this," she promised, voice trembling with anger. Ned felt a pang of pity for her, or perhaps for the children. But he steeled himself, reminding his heart that all his actions were meant to protect the realm. "Take her to secure chambers," he ordered the men. "Keep her guarded, but see that she is comfortable." He glanced at Tommen, who was silent with fright. "The boy as well, and Myrcella if you find her. No harm is to come to them." Renly exhaled, shoulders relaxing a fraction. "It's done then," but Ned knew it was only beginning. The next step was Joffrey, and with him the question of the throne. If Joffrey learned that his mother had been taken, the boy would likely rally any loyal forces he could muster, including the Red Keep's household guard. To that end, a second team was already dispatched. They would corner the newly styled prince, perhaps any moment now, in another part of the castle. The plan had been to move swiftly on all Lannister loyalists. They found Joffrey in the Great Hall of all places, standing on the dais beneath the Iron Throne. Word had reached him that something was amiss, that his mother was in danger. Several Lannister guards clustered around him, along with the Kingsguard knights Meryn Trant and Boros Blunt. Joffrey's face, pale in the flickering torchlight, was twisted in rage. He might have been a boy still, but he held an air of confidence, as if the throne behind him had granted him power already. When Ned, Renly, and their company strode in, weapons drawn, Joffrey shouted, "Arrest them! They're traitors against the crown." Meryn Trant drew his blade, helmet glinting. A storm of voices filled the vast chamber. The gold cloaks, armed and outnumbering the Lannister men, advanced in a half-circle. Renly called out, "Stand down! In the name of King Robert, who even now lays dying." Joffrey's voice cracked, revealing the boy beneath the bluster. "My father is dead? Then I am your king." He made to step forward, but Ser Meryn moved protectively in front of him. Ned took a breath, hoping words might diffuse the moment. "King Robert has named me protector of the realm until the rightful succession is confirmed. You are to stand aside, Prince Joffrey, until we have the truth." He did not say the truth of your birth, but the words lingered in his mind. "You liar!" Joffrey spat, face contorted. "I will have your head for this." The boy's shrill tones set steel to motion. Meryn Trant slashed at the nearest gold cloak, who managed to parry but stumbled. Blades clashed in the echoing space, shouts rose, and Ned felt his heart plunge. This was not how he had wanted it. Renly drew his own sword, face taut. "Enough!" he roared, the sharp ring of metal underscoring his voice. "Throw down your swords. Do it now." For a heartbeat, it seemed the Lannister guards might press on. Then they saw the numbers. The gold cloaks were not just a rabble. They had come in force, and more were pouring in from the hall behind. The Lannister men were pinned, hopelessly outmatched. One by one, grudgingly, swords clattered to the floor. Meryn Trant, outnumbered by 5-1, lowered his blade. Boros Blunt did likewise, though his hatred was clear in his clenched jaw and stiff posture. Joffrey stood alone near the throne, chest heaving. Rage and confusion flickered across his features. In that moment, Ned saw a frightened boy beneath a cruel mask. One of the gold cloaks approached with chains in hand. "Don't you touch me!" Joffrey screeched, recoiling as though from a rabid dog. Renly advanced, his gaze calm but firm. "Your Grace, if you truly are that, we do not mean you harm unless you force our hand. You must come with us." He nodded at the man with the chains. "Secure him, but gently." Hands reached out for Joffrey's wrists. The boy tried to fight, lashing out with a foot, shrieking, "I'll have all your heads, every last one of you." The guards subdued him, snapping manacles around slender wrists. Ned stepped forward, his voice a quiet thunder. "He is but a boy, no roughness." Despite all, he could not abide cruelty. Joffrey's squirming lessened as the chain was fixed. His eyes bright with tears, he tried to conceal behind fury. The hall stilled. Lannister guards were disarmed, the King's Guard forcibly relieved of their charge, and Joffrey Baratheon, self-proclaimed king, was taken prisoner. A hush fell over the chamber as men looked to Ned and Renly. They had effectively seized control of King's Landing. Renly cleared his throat, sheathing his sword. "It's done," he said again, though the words felt heavier this time. "Ned, the city is ours." But Ned Stark knew what it meant. The city might be theirs, but the realm was not. War would follow. Tywin Lannister would not accept this. And there was still Stannis Baratheon, Robert's elder brother, who by law had the stronger claim. Ned let out a slow breath, nodding. "We have the city," he agreed. "But let us pray we can keep the peace." As dawn stretched over King's Landing, pink light shining across the Blackwater, word spread like wildfire. The Lannisters had been ousted. The Queen, the Prince, and the royal children were under armed guard. Word of Robert's final hours drifted from lips to ears. A mixture of fear, confusion, and hope rippled through the streets. Common folk whispered of a swift coup, some praising Ned Stark for his unyielding honor, others cursing him for subverting the rightful heir. In the throne room, now emptied of conflict, Ned stood with Renly and a handful of lords who had thrown in their lot with them. Ser Barristan Selmy was among them, face pale and drawn. Littlefinger lingered to one side, expression unreadable. Varys, hands folded in his voluminous sleeves, said little but missed none of the details. The Iron Throne loomed over them, twisted steel mocking them with its jagged edges. Ned had Robert's will in his hand. "Hear now the words of the late King Robert Baratheon," he began, voice echoing. The statement was short, naming Eddard Stark protector of the realm. Nothing about Joffrey's immediate succession. A legal gambit that provided them breathing room to confirm or deny the heirs. When Ned finished, Renly stepped forward. "Ser Barristan, you served my brother well. Will you swear to abide by Lord Stark's rule until the matter of succession is resolved? Barristan Selmy's eyes flickered with conflict. He was sworn to protect the king. I will obey the wishes of the late King Robert, he said at length, voice heavy. If that includes deferring to Lord Stark as regent, then so be it. Ned inclined his head. He respected the old knight deeply. Your loyalty is appreciated, Ser Barristan. The realm needs steady hands now more than ever. Littlefinger took a step, the soft scrape of his shoe echoing across the floor. My lords, he said in that smooth voice of his, am I to understand that Prince Joffrey is no longer recognized as king? Renly's mouth thinned. He is under guard. The line of succession is in question. There is an elder Baratheon brother who should be considered. Peter Baelish's lips curved in a cunning smile. Ah, Stannis. Yes, of course. He let the silence hang for a moment, then added, a man not well loved, as I recall. Ned stiffened. He is the rightful heir under law, if the truth of these children's parentage is confirmed. He glanced around, mindful that they were treading dangerous ground. But until such time as the evidence is presented, and the realm can rally to him in peace, I will hold the seat of protector. A hush fell as the lords absorbed the statement. The first open mention that Joffrey might not be Robert's son. A dangerous admission, but it was out now, and Ned saw no point in subterfuge. Renly cleared his throat. Until the matter is settled, there must be no illusions of who holds power. The Lannisters will not take this lightly. We must secure the city's defenses. And we must reach out to the great houses, including my elder brother. Shall we simply hand him the throne? One of Renly's men, Lord Serret, voiced the question. Ned answered, handing him the throne blindly would serve no one. We must ensure the realm's stability. Stannis is not known for compromise, but if we can keep King's Landing from bloodshed, we will at least give him no cause to wage war on the city. Let us send an envoy, request his presence to claim what is his by right. Until he arrives, we maintain order. There was murmured assent. Varys clasped his hands. Lord Stark, if I may, we should also consider the small council. We are short a master of laws, and our master of coin stands right here. He gave a slight bow to Littlefinger. We have no master of whispers as well. It would be immodest for me to claim the title, though I serve in that capacity. Baelish's smirk returned. Shall I remain master of coin for this new regency? Or must I turn in my chain? Ned's dislike of Littlefinger curdled within him, but he forced a civil tone. You may continue your duties, though I trust you will find no cause to subvert the will of the king or the regent. Littlefinger bowed, the picture of compliance. But of course, Lord Stark, my only wish is to serve. Ned felt uneasy. The man's silver tongue could twist truths in a heartbeat. Yet, they needed the city's coffers stable, and Peter Baelish was the only one with the thorough knowledge of its labyrinthine finances. For now, he would remain. By midday, ravens had been dispatched. One to Dragonstone, where Stannis was said to reside, commanding him to come at once. Another to Casterly Rock, announcing that the crown had discovered evidence calling Joffrey's lineage into question, and that the boy was thus placed under protective custody. Ned knew the wording would enrage Tywin Lannister, but let the truth come out into the daylight, or let Tywin condemn himself by attacking. The city watch was doubled, the gates manned, and archers placed on the walls. Renly took command of the defense. Though not as seasoned as Stannis in matters of war, he had vigor and presence enough to inspire the men. They need to see a Baratheon leading them, he told Ned at one point. So they know this is no mere coup by outside forces, but a legitimate call for justice. Ned accepted that logic. In truth, he was relieved not to shoulder every burden. Already he missed the north, the clean cold air, the straightforward life. Here, every whispered word could shift the balance, and a slip of the tongue might cost thousands of lives. Sansa and Arya were found in their rooms, both frightened by the commotion. Sansa had heard about men with swords fighting in the halls, and tears stained her cheeks. Arya had clutched her wooden practice sword, eyes wide with something between terror and excitement. Ned soothed them as best he could, telling them they were safe, that this was all to ensure the rightful king would sit the throne. Sansa asked if Joffrey was hurt, voice quavering with concern and lingering affection. Ned gently told her Joffrey was not harmed, only confined for now. The knowledge did little to calm her. Arya, on the other hand, seemed to bristle with suspicion. She asked if they would have to fight if she could help. Ned scolded her, but could not quell his pride at her spirit. That evening, Robert breathed his last. The city learned of his death by dawn, and black banners were raised. Bells tolled across King's Landing, each sonorous knell marking the end of an era. Commoners poured into the streets to mourn and to gossip. The shock of the king's passing mingled with the knowledge that Ned Stark and Renly Baratheon held the city. Some believed the stories that Cersei's incest had been laid bare. Others dismissed it as a vile rumor. In the taverns, men placed wagers on who would march on the city first: Tywin with his fearsome host or Stannis from the sea. Within the Red Keep, Robert's corpse was laid out, a pale form on the bed where he had once thundered with life. Renly stood at the foot of it, face drawn, while Ned offered quiet condolences. Though Robert and Renly had not been as close as Robert and Stannis once were, they were still blood. Could not be easy to lose a brother, especially in such violent fashion. In the corridor, Ned encountered Grand Maester Pycelle, muttering about the new arrangement. "This is highly irregular," he said, brows quivering. The boy Joffrey was recognized by the king for near 13 years. How can we simply cast him aside? Ned fixed the old man with a steady look. "Truth does not bend to convenience, Maester. Evidence suggests Joffrey is not Robert's son. Robert himself may not have known. He let that thought settle. We will present this to the realm's lords. Let them decide if more proof is needed." Pycelle huffed and bowed his head. "As you say, Lord Protector, I shall serve as I always have in King Robert's name." Ned suppressed a mirthless chuckle. Robert's name no longer carried weight. It was only a memory now. But he said nothing, letting the old man go. The tasks of the regency pressed on him like a mountain. He had to secure the city's food supply. Winter might be far off for the south, but hunger could still strike. The gold stores were dwindling, thanks to the extravagant tourneys Robert had loved. Littlefinger would need to raise funds, though how without levying punishing taxes was a riddle. And the biggest question of all, how long until Tywin Lannister came with an army? They did not have to wait long for that answer. Scouts brought news within days. Tywin was already gathering his bannermen, calling in favors from every corner of the Westerlands. Reports spoke of a host of thousands, heavy cavalry as fierce as any in the Seven Kingdoms. The Lannisters had coin, and coin could buy loyalty, muster sells words. Ned recognized the danger. A siege of King's Landing might lead to ruin, especially if the city's population panicked or starved. Renly counseled immediate action. "We should strike first," he urged, "before he's fully assembled. If we smash the Lannister forces in open field, we save ourselves a siege. The gold cloaks aren't enough for that, but the Baratheon bannermen could be. Storm's End is mine to call upon. And you can call the north, can't you, Ned?" Ned considered. "It would take time to bring the Northmen south. My son Robb is at Winterfell. By the time he rallies the bannermen, winter could be upon us. And I am reluctant to leave the city while Stannis remains uncontacted." Renly's mouth pressed into a line. "We cannot sit idle. Tywin will not wait." They were in the council chamber, joined by a few loyal lords. The painted table, no, that was at Dragonstone. Here, only the large wooden table carved with the seven-pointed star in the center. Candles flickered, casting shadows. Littlefinger spoke up in a lazy drawl. "Attacking Tywin Lannister on his own ground would be quite costly, my lords. Perhaps it would be wiser to fortify the city, send out emissaries to treat with him. He might see reason if we offer suitable concessions." Renly's eyes flared. "Concessions? After we imprisoned his daughter and grandchildren? I suspect he'll want more than polite words." Ned drummed his fingers on the table. This was the crux of the dilemma. Lord Tywin is not known for leniency. We might attempt a diplomatic approach, but we must prepare for war. Renly, if you can gather your banners from the Stormlands swiftly, that might deter Tywin from marching directly on us. I'll send word to my son in Winterfell that he must prepare for the worst, though the north is distant." Renly nodded. "I'll ride out at once to gather them. Perhaps we can meet in the field before Tywin grows too bold." His gaze flicked to Ned. "Will you come?" Ned grimaced. "I must remain here to keep order. The city is a tinderbox. Without one of us present, chaos could erupt. Our hold is tenuous." He gazed at the others around the table. "Ser Barristan will remain as Lord Commander of the Kingsguard for now, though we do not truly have a king in place. Let him oversee the city watch with your men, Peter, if you can provide funds for increased pay. They must be loyal." Littlefinger inclined his head, that half-smile lingering. "As you wish, Lord Protector. I am but a humble servant to the throne." Varys said nothing, only watched them with his curious, unreadable eyes. Within a week, Renly departed with a core group of knights and guards, heading south and east to the Stormlands, determined to raise a banner large enough to challenge the Lannisters. Meanwhile, Ned held the capital as regent, signing decrees in King Robert's name for the time being, though the funeral rites for Robert had begun. The realm was in an uneasy lull, a storm about to break. Amid the swirl of politics, Ned found stolen moments to visit his daughters. Sansa had grown quiet, and though her posture was prim and graceful, her eyes were red from crying. Arya flitted about with restless energy, occasionally practicing sword forms with the wooden blade Syrio Farrell had given her. Ned wondered if Syrio would remain in the city now that the upheaval had begun, or if he would slip away. He hoped the Braavosi would stay for Arya's sake, but he could not be certain. One afternoon, as Ned walked the ramparts overlooking Blackwater Bay, he heard footsteps. Turning, he found Ser Barristan behind him. The old knight joined Ned at the crenellations, gazing out at the water. "Lord Stark," Barristan began, voice resonant with quiet sorrow. "I have seen many kings come and go, though Robert was the only one I truly fought for. And now he's gone. I wonder if the realm shall bleed again." Ned sighed, watching gulls dive at the waves. "It might. The Lannisters will not yield without a fight. And with the question of the throne unresolved, Stannis might also come with steel, not just parchment." Barristan nodded. "He is a just man, but harsh. King's Landing has never loved him. They'd sooner flock to Renly, if he claimed the crown." Ned considered that. Renly had hinted at it once, suggesting that the realm would prefer him because he was more charming, more amiable than his older brother. But that would run counter to all that Ned believed about rightful succession. "The law is clear," he said in a quiet voice. "Stannis is the heir if Robert's children are disinherited. I cannot in good conscience place Renly on the throne in his stead." Barristan studied Ned. "You are a man of honor, but honor alone will not keep the peace. I trust your judgment, Lord Stark. Only—" He hesitated, then pressed on. "Beware the spider, Lord Baelish, and all who spin webs in these walls." Ned's eyes hardened. "I keep him close so I might watch him." Barristan inclined his head. "Then may the Seven guide you in these dark times." They parted ways, the knight returning to his duties. Ned remained, gazing over the bay, where the wind carried the brine. He found himself longing for the north, for the sight of pines and snows. But the world had become this heated crucible, forging alliances and betrayals by the hour. In the weeks that followed, missives arrived from the Westerlands. Tywin Lannister demanding the release of Queen Cersei and her children. He threatened open war if they were harmed. He also insisted that Joffrey was Robert's true son, labeling Ned Stark's claims a monstrous lie. Ned responded with carefully chosen words, ensuring Tywin that the Queen and the children were safe, well cared for, but that the matter of succession must be decided by the assembled great lords. No reply came directly from Stannis, though rumor spoke that he was gathering ships at Dragonstone. Some said he had formed alliances with Lysene Selsails, or that Melisandre of Ashai, the Red Woman, was whispering in his ear about gods and rightful claims. Ned prayed that Stannis would see reason enough to come to King's Landing in peace. Meanwhile, the city braced for war. Refugees from the Riverlands trickled in, telling tales of Lannister men raiding near Renly. Tywin was punishing those who might stand with the Starks or the Tullys. Catelyn, Ned's wife, was still in the Riverlands with her father, Hoster Tully, and tensions soared. Letters from her told of burning villages and frightened small folk. She urged Ned to find a peaceful settlement if possible, but also to be ready for the worst. Ned had the boy, Joffrey, moved from the black cells to more comfortable quarters, though still locked and guarded. He was not yet cruel enough to let a child languish in darkness, but Joffrey's temperament remained foul. The boy raved and cursed whenever Ned visited. Once, he even tried to bite a guard in rage. Ned could find no common ground with him, so he let the guards handle the outbursts. Tommen and Myrcella, on the other hand, were quiet and timid in their captivity, reading books or receiving lessons under supervision. They were well-fed, allowed walks in a small courtyard, and seldom caused trouble. Cersei glowered at every guard, seldom speaking except to hurl insults at Ned when he checked on her. She seemed more like a caged animal by the day. It was under this uneasy stasis that the next blow fell. Ravens informed Ned of an approaching Lannister host, led not by Tywin, but by Jaime Lannister. Rumor said the Kingslayer had left Tywin to gather more forces from the Crownlands, swinging around to cut off trade routes to the capital. If Jaime encircled King's Landing from the north and west, the city could be starved into submission. Ned summoned every loyal lord and knight to the council chamber. "We must not let him seal us off," he declared. "We need those supply lines open. The city cannot survive a siege indefinitely, especially with winter rations not yet stocked." Baelish offered a cunning smile. "My gold cloaks can hold the walls, but we cannot fight a pitched battle outside the gates. Unless, of course, you wish to risk the entire city watch in open confrontation," Ser Barristan suggested. "We have some knights and men-at-arms here, but not enough to face Jaime in the field. Renly has gone to gather Stormland's bannermen, and we know not yet if his host is near." The Lannister forces moved swiftly. Ned's temples throbbed. Every choice seemed to lead to disaster. "We must buy time," he said at last, "diplomatically or otherwise. If we can lure Jaime into negotiations, feign willingness to release Cersei or the children, perhaps we can keep him from launching a direct assault. We do not want bloodshed in the streets." Littlefinger raised an eyebrow. "And what if Jaime calls your bluff and attacks anyway? Then we appear weak." Ned turned to him, voice low. "Better to appear weak for a moment and save lives than to show false strength and lose them needlessly." A quiet tension filled the room. Varys cleared his throat delicately. "There is merit to the idea of parley. The Kingslayer might be eager to retrieve his sister and nephew without a lengthy siege. It would preserve the Lannisters' image of power if the exchange seemed diplomatic." "An exchange?" Ned asked. "We do not plan to release them unconditionally." Varys spread his hands. "That is for you to decide, Lord Stark. I merely suggest that a meeting might stall his next move." It was a desperate plan, but Ned saw little alternative. The city was not well provisioned for a siege. He needed reinforcements from the Stormlands or from Stannis. Robb was too far in the north to come quickly. "Send a raven to Jaime Lannister," Ned decided, "requesting a parley outside the city. We'll meet on neutral ground, and ensure we bring sufficient guards to protect ourselves." A flurry of arrangements followed. Horses were readied, a retinue of 100 men chosen, gold cloaks, some household knights loyal to House Stark or House Baratheon. Ned donned armor for the first time since coming south, layered with boiled leather and steel. Age and an old injury ached in his leg, but he forced it aside. Duty and the city's safety demanded it. They rode out at dawn, the gates of King's Landing groaning behind them. A hush fell among the onlookers in the streets. Many recognized Ned Stark, the regent who had toppled Queen Cersei's hold. The name of Stark carried a certain respect even among these southern folk. He was seen as the man who acted when no one else dared. And yet, his gray eyes scanned the crowd, seeing fear and uncertainty in their faces. He could almost hear them wonder if this quiet, solemn lord could truly stave off a vengeful Tywin Lannister. They chose a broad field a league from the city walls for the parley. A tattered September once stood nearby, half ruined by some old conflict. Now it was just scattered stones. Ned and his men arrived first, forming a line near the remains of a crumbled wall. The grass was yellowed with late summer dryness, the sun beating overhead. Before long, a column of horses appeared on the horizon, banners trailing in the wind. Crimson and gold, the Lion of Lannister. Ned's stomach tightened. Jaime Lannister rode at their head, a shining figure in gilded armor, his cloak as white as fresh-fallen snow. He was flanked by a swarm of mounted knights, each bearing the lion crest. More men waited further behind, infantry perhaps. If violence broke out, Ned's 100 men would be at a grave disadvantage. Jaime reined in a short distance away, surveying Ned and his men with an insolent smile. "Lord Eddard Stark," he said, "protector of the realm, if the rumors are true." Ned dismounted, stepping forward. "Sir Jaime, I appreciate you coming to speak rather than shedding blood." Jaime swung off his horse, one hand resting casually on the pommel of his sword. His green eyes gleamed. "You have something I want, Stark. My sister, my nephew, my niece as well. How is my dear brother Tyrion? Or do you have him locked away, too?" Ned held Jaime's gaze without flinching. "Tyrion is not in my custody. Last I heard, he was traveling the Riverlands after an altercation with my wife." Ned had heard rumors of Tyrion being captured by Catelyn and taken to the Eyrie, but then escaping via some cunning means. Jaime sneered. "So you capture my sister and her children, but let my brother wander free? Your sense of justice is selective." "They are held so we can ensure the realm's safety," Ned retorted. "You know why, Kingslayer? The matter of Joffrey's parentage." Jaime's smirk vanished, replaced by a steely glare. "He is the son of King Robert. No matter what slander you and your pet friends conjure, you have no right to hold him." Ned felt a surge of anger, but suppressed it, recalling that Jaime was indeed rumored to be the actual father. "If I have no right, the realm's lords will decide. We did not come here to trade insults, Sir Jaime. We came to prevent a war. Will you continue to muster forces against the city?" Jaime laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. "If you think I'll just ride away while my family is caged, you're a bigger fool than I thought. Release the queen and the children to me, and perhaps we can talk peace." He spread his hands, feigning magnanimity. "I might even speak to Lord Tywin, counsel him to spare your precious city from a siege." Ned's men bristled at the arrogance, but Ned held them back with a raised hand. "The queen and the children will remain under protective custody until the lords of the realm decide the question of succession," he said firmly. "However, I am willing to guarantee their safety and comfort. If you withdraw your forces from the Crownlands, cease your raids, and return to Casterly Rock to await the Great Council, we can avoid further bloodshed." Jaime's mouth curved in a sneer. "You hold the city by force and call it justice. You imprison the rightful king, my sister's child, and call it mercy. Spare me the speeches, Stark." His gloved hand tightened on his sword's hilt. "I offer you a final chance. Release them. Swear fealty to Joffrey, or we will take King's Landing by storm, and every man of yours will perish. You'll see your daughters' heads mounted on the walls if you force our hand." Ned's rage flared, cold and deadly. The mention of his daughters was a step too far. He advanced a pace, ignoring the alarm of his men. "Speak of my daughters again," he said in a tone as wintry as the north, "and you'll taste my steel here and now, Lannister." Jaime's eyes flicked to Ned's scabbard, then back to Ned's face. "Bold words, but do you truly think to best me with a sword?" He glanced around, noting the gold cloaks behind Ned. "Even if you win, my men will cut you down. Is that how you wish to die?" Ned held his gaze. "If it spares my daughters from your threats, I'd challenge you here. You'll find me less easy to ambush in daylight than I was in the streets." Jaime's grin returned, a cruel edge in it. "I'm tempted," he murmured. For a moment, it seemed he might draw. Tension rippled across both lines of soldiers. The wind died, but Jaime slowly released his sword's hilt. "Not today, Stark. I have an army to lead, and you have a city to hide in." He stepped back toward his horse, voice carrying in the hush. "Remember my offer. Release them or we'll tear your gates down. I'll give you 1 week to send me your answer or I march." Ned's jaw clenched. He could see the zeal in the Lannister knights around Jaime, men eager for glory and plunder. "Then do as you must," he answered gravely. "But know this, if you harm a single child, your entire house will suffer the vengeance of the North." Jaime swung astride his horse, golden hair glinting. "We shall see who suffers, Stark." He wheeled his steed around, and the Lannisters rode off in a cloud of dust. Ned stared after them, feeling the weight of war settle on his shoulders. He knew Jaime would not bluff. The man was dangerous, cunning, and proud. King's Landing was now a city under direct threat of siege. And with Renly's forces yet to arrive, and Stannis' intentions unknown, the margin for error was thinner than a blade's edge. He and his men rode back to the city. The gates closed behind them, the guards exchanging worried glances. Back in the Red Keep, Ned convened the council, relaying Jaime's ultimatum. Peter Baelish tapped his fingers on the table, feigning disinterest but clearly spinning wheels behind his mocking eyes. Varys sighed, speaking softly about the horrors a siege would bring. Ser Barristan sat in stony silence, fists clenched. "The man is as bold as they say," Barristan remarked at last. "A week. We have a week to see if Renly arrives with an army, or if Stannis appears by sea. Otherwise, Jaime will attempt to encircle us." Ned nodded. "We prepare. If we must defend these walls, so be it. But the realm will bleed if Tywin and Jaime converge. We cannot fight 2 Lannister armies at once without help." Littlefinger gave an exaggerated shrug. "Then perhaps we should send the children back to him, keep the queen, or vice versa. We must bargain with something. That or watch the city starve." Ned turned on him, anger flaring. "I will not hand over innocent children to that man. He threatened to mount heads on spikes. I cannot trust him with Tommen and Myrcella." "Oh, but you trust yourself to keep them caged?" Baelish shot back lightly. "The difference might be lost on them." Ned glowered. "We do what we must for the realm." Silence fell, thick with tension. At length, Varys cleared his throat. "My little birds tell me Renly's forces may be marching now. If they push hard, they might arrive before a fortnight passes. That, combined with the city watch, might be enough to discourage an assault. Perhaps even enough to ride out and face Jaime Lannister in open battle." Ser Barristan frowned. "If we lose that battle, King's Landing is doomed. The people rely on these walls." The council devolved into anxious debate. Ned took no pleasure in playing the role of mediator, but he had no choice. Eventually, they agreed to wait for Renly, to strengthen the city's defenses, and to send urgent ravens to Dragonstone again, pleading for Stannis to come and claim the throne if he would do so peacefully. Time slipped away with alarming speed. On the 5th day of that countdown, Ned stood on the walls watching dust rise on the horizon. His heart leapt, hoping it might be Renly's vanguard. But no, this was a smaller company, bearing no banners he recognized. The watchers signaled that they approached under a white flag of truce. Ned ordered the gates opened cautiously. A column of men rode in, no more than 20. At their head was a tall man with red hair and a thick beard, clad in leather and steel. "I am Roderick Castle," he called, "of House Stark." Ned's breath caught. Ser Roderick. Indeed, it was the loyal knight from Winterfell, sent to escort Catelyn or to handle business. Ned hurried down to meet him in the courtyard. "Ser Roderick," Ned said, grasping the man's forearm in relief. "You're a welcome sight. Where is my lady wife?" Roderick's face was grave. "She remains in the Riverlands, my lord, negotiating with her uncle, Ser Brynden Tully. There's been word that Robb Stark is mustering men in the north, but he's still too far to march swiftly." He paused. "I came because Lady Catelyn wishes you to know that Walder Frey's crossing might be necessary if we want to bring the Northmen south quickly." The phrase, however, demands certain terms. There's also the matter of your brother-in-law, Edmure Tully, who is skirmishing with Lannister forces near Riverrun. Ned closed his eyes briefly. The war was spreading. "And how fare my boys at Winterfell?" he asked, voice quieter. "They are well, my lord. Bran is healing and Rickon is strong. Robb is young, but he stands tall among the northern bannermen. They heed him, relief mixed with dread." He longed to see them, but every step of this war seemed to lengthen the distance. "Your tidings are good and ill, Ser Rodrik. You've ridden far to bring them." "Thank you." Rodrik bowed his head, eyes flicking over the city. "King's Landing, I expected more chaos, my lord. Are you truly in command here?" "For now," Ned said grimly, guiding him toward the Red Keep. "But chaos creeps in the shadows. The Lannisters threaten from without, and 1,000 foes lurk within. Come, we'll talk in private." That evening, Ned and Rodrik dined together in the Solar, discussing the complexities of the war. Over ale and bread, they shared quiet words. Rodrik explained that the North was ready to march if needed, but the journey was long, and winter's approach made roads perilous. The Riverlords were harried by Lannister raids. Walder Frey, as ever, demanded concessions to allow the North's swift passage. Time was the enemy. When dawn broke on the 6th day, Ned stood once again upon the walls, scanning the horizon for any sign of Renly's banners. None appeared. Joffrey's ultimatum ticked in his mind. 1 week, then Jaime would march. It was said that Tywin was not far behind, mustering a larger army to smash any last resistance. The city below still bustled, but an undercurrent of fear pulsed through the streets. Prices for bread and fish soared. Rumors of war turned neighbors suspicious. Thieves grew bold in the confusion. Ned ordered the gold cloaks to crack down, but that only went so far. On the 7th day, tension mounted to a fever pitch. The walls were manned by archers, the gatehouses fortified. Boiling oil was prepared, though Ned prayed they'd not have to use it. He conferred with Ser Barristan, readying for an assault. Joffrey remained locked away, screaming at the guards whenever they refused to let him out. Cersei refused food for a day, possibly staging a hunger protest, but eventually relented. As dusk fell, horns sounded from the North Road. Ned's heart pounded. Men rushed to vantage points, preparing for an attack. But soon, cries of relief spread. "It's Renly Baratheon! Lord Renly returns!" Renly came at the head of a sizable force, 2,000 men at least. Banners of the Green Stag fluttered, mixing with the sigils of lords from the Stormlands. Not an army to rival Tywin's rumored tens of thousands, but enough to stiffen King's Landing's defenses and perhaps hold out until Stannis or the North could reinforce them further. Ned met Renly in the courtyard, where the younger Baratheon swung off his horse, face grimy with road dust yet triumphant. "We made all haste," Renly said, clasping Ned's arm. "Is the city still ours?" "For the moment," Ned replied, clasping back. "Jaime threatened to march today if we did not release Cersei and the children." Renly's lip curled. "We'll see about that. The walls are strong, and we have enough men to discourage a frontal assault. And should he lay siege, we'll hold until Stannis arrives." He looked around. "Speaking of Stannis?" Ned shook his head. "No reply beyond rumors. He readies ships at Dragonstone. I've heard talk of a Red Priestess in his council. I know not his plans." Renly frowned. "Then we stand alone for now, but at least we stand with swords in hand." At dawn of the 8th day, scouts reported movement near the Lannister camps. Jaime was indeed approaching from the west with a force of roughly 6,000. Enough to besiege the city's western gates, but not enough to fully encircle. Word came that Tywin trailed with a much larger army, perhaps 10 days behind. The city now braced for the first blow of war. Ned deployed Renly's men along the gates, kept a small reserve at the Red Keep, and ready to watch from the battlements. Jaime's lines appeared as a shimmer of steel in the distance, columns of men establishing a perimeter. Banners soared, and siege engines began to roll forward. Catapults, rams, preparations for a drawn-out fight. Ned stood beside Renly on the ramparts, the younger man's expression dark. "We might sally out," Renly mused. "Hit them before they can fully deploy. But it's risky." Ned studied the vastness of the Lannister host. "They're well-disciplined and we are outnumbered. A sally might be cut down. Our best hope might be to hold the walls until something shifts. Either Stannis arrives or we negotiate." Renly's eyes narrowed. "Negotiate? Jaime threatened to kill your children. Or worse, you expect sense from him." Ned's mouth was a hard line. "I do not. But I will not condemn the small folk to a siege if there is another way." He gazed out at the rising pavilions of the Lannister camp. "Still, I fear this will end in blood." Sure enough, within hours, the Lannisters tested the city's defenses. A small force advanced on the gate, raising shields against arrows. Ned commanded the archers to hold fire until they were in range. At the last moment, a volley of arrows rained down, sending men scrambling for cover. A few fell, but most retreated behind mantlets. Ned's heart hammered as he watched the first clash of the siege unfold. The city watch poured boiling oil from the walls, horrifying screams echoing. Smoke drifted in the hot sun. War had truly begun. From that day forward, King's Landing endured a partial siege. Jaime's men cut off roads to the west, blocking trade. Ships still managed to bring some supplies to the port, but it was never enough for a city of this size. Prices soared higher, and the mood in the streets turned desperate. Ned, now forced to ration grain, assigned the gold cloaks to keep order. Bread riots threatened. Men and women cursed the name of Lannister, and, at times, the name of Stark, seeing no difference between those who fought for power and those who suffered under it. Renly's forces patrolled the walls, repelling occasional probes by the Lannisters. Days bled into nights of watchful tension. Messengers attempted to slip past the blockade to find Stannis or the approaching Tywin. Some succeeded, some never returned. Joffrey raged in captivity, and Cersei's resentment burned fiercely. Yet she could do little but pace her chamber. The children, Tommen and Myrcella, huddled together for comfort, seldom seeing the outside world. In the midst of this, Ned sensed the strain wearing on him. His leg ached from an old wound, and the weight of command pressed heavily on his conscience. He found little rest, waking from uneasy dreams of Robert's voice calling him to battle. Each new day he prayed for Stannis to appear on the horizon, or for some miracle that would break the siege. None came. On the 12th day of siege, the watchers spotted fresh dust clouds in the distance. "An army!" came the shout. Ned's heart leapt. Renly joined him on the ramparts, scanning the horizon. Banners emerged, though at this distance, the sigils were unclear. A hush fell across the defenders, each hoping for rescue, each dreading it might be Tywin's massive host. As the minutes crawled by, a cry rang out. "The fiery heart! They bear a fiery heart!" Ned felt his blood run cold. The fiery heart. The sigil of Renly, the Lord of Light, rumored to fly beside the crowned stag of Stannis Baratheon. But was Stannis friend or foe? And if he claimed the throne by force, would he show mercy or enthrone himself on their ashes? Renly drew a breath, face unreadable. "My brother has arrived," he said softly. "Now we see where his loyalties lie, with the realm or with his own ambition." Below, in the fields, Jaime's men scrambled to adjust their lines, uncertain whether this new force came as allies or enemies. The encampment rippled with alarm, and within the city, tension soared to a peak. If Stannis attacked the Lannisters, King's Landing had a chance. If he chose to assault the city for jailing Joffrey, claiming his own crown in blood, they could be doomed. Ned closed his eyes, sending a silent prayer to the old gods. The final turn of fate was at hand, shaped by the man who should, by all rights, be king. He opened them again, jaw set, staring out at the swirling dust and fluttering banners. In that moment, he felt the weave of destiny tighten. The realm perched on the razor's edge of war or salvation. No matter how this ended, Ned Stark vowed he would do what he must to preserve the last vestiges of honor in a kingdom drowning in ambition and lies. And so, with King's Landing braced under siege, Renly Baratheon's forces holding the walls, and Stannis Baratheon's arrival heralding a fateful clash, the story's next chapter was about to unfold. The sun beat down upon the battered fields, where men in crimson and men in green faced off, and on the horizon, banners of Black Stag and Red Heart approached in grim procession, as though the gods themselves had come to judge who was truly worthy of the Iron Throne. Ned Stark stood atop the walls of the Red Keep, the stone beneath his feet still warm from the unrelenting sun. His gray eyes remained fixed on the host approaching from the southeast, a slow-moving column that kicked up dust in the dried grasses outside King's Landing. A nearby sentry peered through a weighted spyglass and confirmed once more what had already circulated among the watchers. These were not the colors of Tywin Lannister, nor the smaller host Jaime commanded in the west. They bore the crowned stag entwined with the fiery heart, the sigil of Stannis Baratheon, alongside a red sunburst that rumor named the Lord of Light's emblem. Word of Stannis's new god had drifted across the narrow sea, through tavern whispers and spider-little rumors from Varys's birds. Now, at last, the truth stood in plain sight, arriving in force. Would he come as salvation or destroyer? Renly Baratheon stood at Ned's side. The younger man's green eyes narrowed at the sight of the distant banners. The wind had shifted, carrying with it a faint tang of smoke and the salt from Blackwater Bay. Renly's voice was tight when he spoke. I never knew my brother to kneel at any altar. Not even the Seven interested him. Now he marches behind this Red Priestess's banner? I wonder if it's true what they say, that he burns idols of the Seven and speaks of a single god. Ned's cloak fluttered around him, black against the pale stone. He looked to Renly, seeing the tension in the man's jaw. Whatever Stannis has chosen in matters of faith, he is still Robert's elder brother, the rightful heir if the rumors of Joffrey's birth prove true, and if he demands the city open its gates to him, so he can claim the throne immediately. Renly's hand rested on the hilt of his sword. Shall we yield what we seized at so much cost? Ned pressed his lips together. We seized it to protect the realm from the Lannisters' stranglehold. Our loyalty should be to the rightful king, and I gave Robert my word, to name Stannis if Joffrey is proved baseborn. I will not break faith. Yet I will not simply surrender King's Landing to be sacked by a newly come army, nor let Stannis make war upon us if he sees only enemies within these walls. We must speak with him. Renly gave a short nod. Aye, let us hope he listens. Then he turned his gaze back to the horizon, where the glimmer of spears and the distant shape of standards moved in slow procession. What of the Kingslayer in the west? There's still his siege to consider. Ned's voice turned grim. Jaime has mostly harried the city's western roads, cutting off trade. The Lannisters have tested the walls, but so far they haven't launched a full assault. Perhaps they wait for Tywin's larger force. With Stannis now appearing, the entire balance may shift. A fresh gust of wind carried the echoes of horns sounding in the Lannister camp, faint but unmistakable. The watchers along the ramparts stirred, anxious, uncertain whether the horns heralded an attack on the western gate or an alarm at the sight of a new foe. Down in the muddy yards behind the Red Keep, men scrambled, hauling barrels of pitch, stacking them near the walls, while archers checked bowstrings. The city was coiled like a wounded animal, ready to lash out in every direction. Ned sighed. For weeks now, he had felt as though he stood on a knife's edge. After Robert's death, the swift seizure of the city had been a shock to everyone, but it was far from a final solution. Where once Cersei and Joffrey had threatened to hold all power, now the Lannisters threatened from without, and one of Robert's brothers approached from another quarter. Day by day, Ned carried the same sense of dread he once felt in the war against the Mad King, knowing that any wrong step could unleash ruin. He tried to find solace in the memory of Robert's voice, in the knowledge that at least Arya and Sansa were safe behind these walls. He often prayed that somewhere beyond these battles, his son Robb remained unscathed in the north. The afternoon wore on, and the watchers called down fresh reports. Stannis' force was larger than they had first assumed, somewhere around 8,000 men, though the count was uncertain. Many were foot soldiers carrying tall spears, There were knights in smaller contingents, and a few machines that looked like siege equipment, the shapes of which bobbed among the ranks. A man with keen eyes claimed to see the painted banners of Storm's End, of House Celtigar, and even the gaudy sunburst standard of some foreign sell-sail company. The speculation among the city's defenders began. Had Stannis hired swords from across the sea, or were these men allied to the new faith? By dusk, that host had made camp a league away from the city, outside the range of archers on the walls. Torches glowed in the gloom like a distant constellation. The Lannisters to the west had also drawn closer in the waning light, forming a tighter perimeter. King's Landing thus lay between two great camps. P.S. Inside the gates, the small folk grew more restless than ever. Rumors flew thick as midges, that the city would be stormed from both sides, that a second Targaryen had risen in the east, that Ned Stark would blow the gates open and betray them to an invading army. None of it was true, but fear gave every whisper more power than a herald's trumpet. In the highest tower of the Red Keep, Ned conferred with Renly and Ser Barristan Selmy. They stood around a table that had been dragged up from the council chamber, upon which they arranged stones to represent the armies, marking the broad roads and city walls with rough charcoal. A single lantern burned overhead, flickering across stone walls, and the tension etched on their faces. Renly tapped a stone representing Stannis' camp. He'll want the throne, that much is certain. He must have learned of Joffrey's parentage by now. We can assume he won't accept any arrangement that doesn't name him as king. Ned folded his arms. He is the lawful heir, though that doesn't mean we open the gates without terms. The city's safety must be guaranteed. Ser Barristan studied the makeshift map. We might send a party to parley with Stannis before Jaime or Tywin attempts to treat with him first. If the Lannisters manage to strike a bargain, or if Stannis sees them as lesser foes than we are, we could have a pincer around the city from two enemies instead of one. That's true. Ned exhaled slowly. Jaime and Tywin are cunning enough to exploit any chance to turn Stannis upon us, or let him bloody us first, then finish whichever side remains. We cannot allow that. We'll send an envoy. We have but little time to secure some alliance or at least a truce. I will go myself. Stannis trusts no one, but he might respect an honest word. Renly eyed him. Then I'll remain behind to keep watch on the gates and hold these walls in case the Lannisters sense weakness. But do not let him intimidate you, Ned. My brother can be as cold as a blade of iron. Ned answered with a thin, humorless smile. Robert once told me the same, but I have faced colder things than Stannis Baratheon. They arranged the next morning's plan. At first light, Ned would ride out with a carefully chosen retinue under a flag of truce. Word would be sent by Raven ahead of them, announcing that the Lord Protector of the realm wished to negotiate terms with Lord Stannis Baratheon. Some called it a risk. If Stannis had grown cruel or mad with zealotry, he could seize Ned and demand the city's surrender. But Ned had always believed in meeting problems face to face. If Stannis had any sense left, they might still avoid a massacre. Ned parted from them, seeking brief rest. But before he climbed the stairs to his chamber, he made his way to the wing where Cersei and the royal children were kept under guard. He had not spoken to the Queen in days, ever since Jaime Lannister's ultimatum. The corridor leading to their quarters was lit by torches in iron brackets, and guards in stark livery stood outside. One recognized Ned and allowed him entry, a note of caution in his eyes. He found Cersei seated near a shuttered window, wearing a simple gown of gray. Her hair was brushed but unadorned, and she looked thinner than before, as though she refused more meals than she accepted. Myrcella and Tommen were not in the room, likely in the adjoining chamber under watchful eyes. Cersei barely glanced up when Ned entered, but her posture stiffened. "Come to gloat?" she asked coldly, gaze fixed on the shadowed corner. "Or to remind me yet again that I'm a prisoner?" Ned stood just inside the threshold. The guard closed the door, though he likely remained outside with an ear turned. "I came to ensure you and your children are well. My orders are that you not be mistreated." "Ah yes, the famed mercy of the Honorable Ned Stark." Cersei's lip curled. Her hand toyed with the embroidered edge of her sleeve. We are fed, if you call these plain meals food. We are confined, but not beaten. That alone is something, I suppose. My father and brother remain outside your walls. Perhaps they'll starve the city until your people beg to hand us back." Ned inclined his head. That might be their plan. But Stannis Baratheon has also arrived, a third force in this struggle. That made her glance at him. Stannis. The name seemed to shape itself like a threat in her mouth. "And do you plan to bow to that humorless lout? A man so stiff and joyless that even Robert barely suffered him." Ned's patience waned, but he kept his voice level. "Robert named me protector until Stannis's claim could be resolved. I intend to meet with him tomorrow." She studied him with green eyes that flashed in the torchlight. "And if you do pass these walls, perhaps he'll carve you up as a traitor, or maybe you'll slither into an alliance, feeding him my children like lambs." Her tone turned venomous. "Stannis despises me as much as he despised Robert's appetites." Ned drew a measured breath. "Your children are safe, my lady, so long as no harm befalls the city. You have my word. I would sooner die than allow harm to Tommen or Myrcella." She laughed, bitter and hollow. "Very noble. And what of Joffrey? He was taken in chains, cast into some dark cell. Is that your idea of mercy?" "Joffrey is in a guarded chamber as well," Ned corrected. "I did not leave him to rot in the black cells. He remains locked away because he tried to call for my execution and for the slaughter of the gold cloaks who arrested him. I cannot free him until this war is resolved." Cersei's mouth twisted. Then she looked away. "Get out. I've no more interest in hearing your feigned concerns." Ned regarded her for a moment, pity and exasperation mixing in his chest. "As you wish." He turned to leave, pausing at the threshold. "I pray for your children's safety as much as my own. All we can do now is seek an end to this bloodshed." He left her in the hush of that lamplit room, hearing no reply. His footsteps carried him through the corridors until he climbed the stairs to his private chamber. There he found Sansa and Arya waiting, each with their own expression of worry. The girls rose from chairs near the hearth when he entered. Arya's wooden practice sword lay across her lap, and Sansa's hands were twisting in her skirts. At the sight of Ned, they rushed forward, both speaking at once, flooding him with anxious questions about the armies outside the city. Ned held up a hand, guiding them gently back to their seats. "I'll tell you what I can." He sat across from them, leaning forward with his forearms on his knees. The glow of the fire accentuated the lines of fatigue in his face. "A second army arrived today, led by Stannis Baratheon. He was your Uncle Robert's brother. He may intend to claim the throne. We are uncertain of his next step." Arya's gray eyes were bright with too many emotions. "But he's not here to kill us, is he? He's your friend, father." Ned could not offer false reassurance. "I don't know if friend is the right word, but I don't believe Stannis would harm innocents. He is hard, but he was never known for cruelty." Sansa, anxious and pale, leaned closer. "Will there be fighting inside the city? Some say there will be a battle in the streets." Ned's heart clenched at the thought. "If I can prevent that, I will. Renly and I have men on the walls, enough to discourage Jaime from a reckless assault. Perhaps Stannis' presence will make the Lannisters think twice. One way or another, I intend to leave in the morning to meet with him outside the gates." Arya stiffened. "Outside the gates? But it's dangerous. What if you don't come back?" Sansa's hands fluttered. "Please, father, send someone else. You can't risk it." Ned lifted a hand to calm them. "My presence might be what keeps Stannis from attacking. If he believes the city seized by traitors, he may show no restraint. I have to speak to him, to show him we only acted under Robert's final will." He paused, brushing a loose strand of Arya's hair back from her face. "I will return if the gods are good. You two must stay here under guard. Ser Rodrik will look after you in my absence." They nodded, subdued but resigned. Arya clutched her wooden blade as though it might keep the dangers at bay. Sansa asked if it might help if she wrote a letter to Stannis, pleading for peace. Her earnestness moved Ned. but he gently explained that such a letter would likely mean little to a man like Stannis, who prized law and order above all else. Yet he praised her for wanting to help. Then, weary, he kissed them both on the brow and sent them back to their chambers. The night was short and filled with uneasy dreams of a stag with burning antlers locked in battle against a snarling lion, while wolves howled in the distance. When dawn broke, gray and chill, Ned donned his armor. He chose a set more practical than ornate, steel plates layered atop boiled leather, the direwolf of House Stark etched on his breastplate. The old wound in his leg ached dully, but he ignored it, descending the steps of the Red Keep to where his horse and men waited in the courtyard. Renly met him there, likewise armored, though he would not ride out today. He was there to see him off. Ser Barristan Selmy also appeared, silently offering Ned a nod of respect. A small retinue of 24 knights and guards would accompany Ned. Among them was Ser Roderick Castle, who insisted on riding at Ned's side for his protection, though Ned had almost asked him to remain and watch the girls. In the end, Ned accepted his loyal retainer's insistence. The city gates opened with a groaning creak, and they rode forth under a white banner raised high by one of the gold cloaks. Spectators lined the streets within, some cheering at the sight of Lord Stark, others merely watching with hollow eyes, fear gnawing at them. Outside the gates, the noise of the city gave way to the open plain where the besieging Lannister lines kept their distance. A party of Lannister riders watched from across the field but did not impede them. It seemed Jaime Lannister had received the same notice. The truce banner would be honored. Soon, Ned's group skirted around the Lannister pickets, forging a path toward Stannis' encampment. Even from afar, Ned saw activity. Men gathering wood, spiking sharpened pikes into the ground, building what looked to be the beginnings of siege towers. The banners of Dragonstone snapped in the morning breeze, black stag on gold. The antlers sometimes shone wreathed in red flames. At the edge of that camp, they were met by a contingent of men wearing the sigil of House Baratheon quartered with a new design. A stag crowned by flames, beneath which a red heart was emblazoned. Their captain stepped forth. He had a lean face with hollow cheeks and wore the insignia of a knight or lesser lord. He lifted a hand in greeting, though his expression was stony. "You are Eddard Stark?" Ned inclined his head. "I am Lord Stark, yes. I come under a banner of truce, at your lord's invitation." The captain's eyes flicked to the white banner. He motioned for Ned's men to remain behind a line of pikes while Ned alone and perhaps one other could ride farther into the camp. It was not unexpected that Stannis would want to control the surroundings of any meeting. Ned considered it carefully, then beckoned Ser Roderick to join him. The rest he ordered to wait, and so, with Roderick at his side, Ned rode deeper into the camp while the Baratheon men followed on foot. They passed rows of tents in strict formation, each bearing the new sigil or the older crowned stag. The men themselves had a disciplined air, though Ned noticed some wearing the 7-pointed star on their belts, while others bore tokens shaped like a fiery heart. He sensed tension among the troops, as if the older faith and the new had found uneasy coexistence under Stannis. There were also Sellswords, rough-faced men with foreign accents, their half-curious, half-hostile stares lingering on Ned's Stark sigil. At last, they arrived before the largest tent, near which a standard fluttered, black cloth with a brilliant red heart in the center, crowned stag rearing within. Outside stood a knight in dark plate armor. His surcoat displayed a sunburst, and when he raised his visor, Ned recognized Ser Axel Florent, if memory served. The man gestured them inside without a word. The tent was spacious, its walls hung with crimson drapery embroidered with gold thread. A brazier glowed to chase away the morning chill, filling the air with a faint tang of charcoal. A wide table dominated the center, strewn with maps of the Crownlands and small carved figurines marking troop positions. Standing over it, flanked by a tall woman in red robes, was Stannis Baratheon. Ned studied him for a moment. A lean man with a hard jaw and a close-cropped beard flecked with gray. He wore mail under a tabard that bore the flaming heart and stag. His eyes were chips of obsidian, and his mouth pressed into a perpetual frown. The woman at his side had coppery hair and pale skin. She wore some exotic necklace that glimmered like living fire. Ned recalled the stories. Melisandre of Ashai, the Red Woman. Stannis turned from the table as Ned entered, arms folded. "Lord Eddard Stark," he said in a voice like iron scraping stone. "I expected you sooner." Ned inclined his head. "Lord Stannis, I came as soon as I learned of your arrival. We had to ensure the Lannisters wouldn't hinder our passage." Stannis made a faint sound that might have been a snort. "The Lannisters, they sit outside the west gate like a pack of carrion crows, picking at the edges of your city. Tell me, Stark, did you truly seize King's Landing in my late brother's name? Or are you forging your own path to power?" Melisandre stood silently, hands folded, but her presence felt like a coil of tension. Ser Roderick bristled at the implied accusation, but Ned kept his composure. "Robert named me protector of the realm on his deathbed, to hold the city until the rightful heir was confirmed. I believe that heir to be you, Lord Stannis, as Robert's older brother and the next male in the Baratheon line. The boy Joffrey is not Robert's trueborn son." Stannis's gaze flicked to Melisandre, then back to Ned. "So you accept the truth of his parentage. Good. That spares us one argument. But what do you intend now that the wolves have seized the lion's den? Shall you hand me the city?" Ned paused, choosing his words carefully. "The city is not a prize to be given. The people are frightened. War looms at the gates. I would see the rightful king crowned, but I also must ensure the safety of its inhabitants, including my own men who bled to remove Cersei Lannister from power. If you come as king, we ask for terms that ensure peace, stability, and no wanton sacking. The Lannisters remain an immediate threat, and we cannot let them take advantage of any internal strife." A flicker in Stannis's eyes suggested he expected no less from Ned. "You fear I would burn King's Landing as Aerys once threatened?" Melisandre's voice, soft but resonant, cut across the tension. "The Lord of Light spares those who do not stand in the path of his chosen champion. If the city accepts its rightful king, no harm need come. But those who cling to false idols or false kings will face the flames." Ned glanced at her, unsettled by the intensity in her eyes. "We do not cling to false kings, my lady. We only want a lawful transition of power. Lord Stannis, if you mean to claim the Iron Throne, I will not oppose you, provided you vow to preserve the city, punish the Lannisters according to the law, and protect the innocent. Renly Baratheon is with me. I must ask how you wish to handle that." Stannis's mouth twitched, as though a bitter taste overcame him. "Renly, my younger brother believes a king must be loved, not merely feared. Once I heard he meant to claim the crown himself. Did he suddenly lose heart? He joined me in seizing the city to remove Cersei and Joffrey," Ned replied, keeping an even tone. "He has not proclaimed himself king. He came to help me hold King's Landing in the name of the rightful heir. Perhaps he once considered it, but events have changed." Melisandre watched, silent again, while Stannis's eyes bored into Ned. "A fleeting fancy, then. Renly has always been a man of ambition and charm. Yet the law is clear. I am the heir. Whether he acknowledges it or not, I shall claim what is mine." Ser Roderick cleared his throat, unable to contain himself. "Then perhaps we can form a united front against the Lannisters, and your Lord Father's memory can be honored, if I may speak so plainly. The realm needs stability." Stannis's sharp gaze fell on the knight. "I did not ask for your counsel, Ser Castle, but you speak truth enough. My banners are raised. My men are prepared for siege. Yet if King's Landing is already in Baratheon hands, perhaps we need not waste our strength on a city that will open its gates." Ned felt hope flicker in his chest. "If you can promise order, we will open the gates, yes. I do not want more blood spilled in the streets. But you must accept that Renly and I hold the city in trust. Not against you. You will be welcomed as king. Once crowned, you can call your banners to deal with the Lannisters properly." Stannis paused, eyes drifting to the table with the maps. He tapped a carved lion piece that sat west of the city's depiction. And how do you propose we handle Tywin Lannister and his armies? Or the Kingslayer prowling outside your gates? Ned moved closer, eyeing the map. We have a force of around 2,000 from the Stormlands, Renly's men. The city watch numbers 5,000 on paper, though not all are well-trained. Lord Stannis, by your approach, you add roughly 8,000. That may be enough to face Jaime's 6,000 and hold the city walls until Tywin arrives. But if Tywin comes with a rumored force of 20,000, we could be in dire straits. We might call the North for more men, but they won't arrive quickly enough to help in any immediate battle. Stannis gave a terse nod. War is rarely decided on convenience. We must also consider that the Riverlords might join you if they see a chance to throw off the Lannisters. Edmure Tully is beleaguered at Riverrun. If they realize I am rightful king, perhaps they will side with me. Melisandre smiled slightly, though there was a predatory cast to it. All kneel before the chosen king or they burn. The flames of R'hllor do not discriminate. Neither Ned nor Stannis commented on that, though Ned saw the flick of distaste crossing Stannis's eyes for half a heartbeat. Ned cleared his throat. We can send ravens at once to the Riverlands, to the Vale, and to the north, proclaiming you king. If the realm sees that King's Landing is stable under your rule, that might undercut Tywin's claim of defending a rightful queen and her children. But the question remains, what do we do with Cersei and the children? They are your niece and nephews in a sense if one counts the years she was wed to Robert. Yet there is the matter of their parentage. Stannis's voice emerged like a blade drawn across stone. Spare me that nonsense. They are Lannisters. I have no illusions. My brother never saw it, or else he refused to see it. Still, I won't be known as a butcher of children. If they remain hostages, that might force Tywin to yield. But we must handle them carefully. If word spreads that I took the throne and executed Robert's children, half the realm will recoil in horror, ignorant of the truth. For now, keep them under lock and key. They will answer for the crime of usurpation in due time. The mother is more culpable than the babes. A subtle wave of relief knotted itself in Ned's chest. He had feared that Stannis might listen to the Red Woman urging for a fiery sacrifice or some horror. Agreed. And Joffrey? Stannis's mouth hardened. He is the figurehead the Lannisters used, but he's no rightful heir. Once my throne is secured, he can face the king's justice. Until then, we keep him as we would any dangerous captive, guarded and under watch. Melisandre touched the table's edge, her eyes drifting as if in a private reverie. The flames show me many shapes, my lord, she said quietly. I have seen a boy with a golden shadow, twisting in the darkness. He poses a threat so long as he draws breath. Yet, perhaps the time is not yet come for him to fall under the Red God's judgment. Stannis gave her a sidelong look. We shall see. Then he turned back to Ned. Lord Stark, if I march my men around the city to confront the Lannisters, will your gates remain open to me? Ned dipped his head. Yes, if you do not harm the people, if you accept the city's fealty peaceably, we will open the gates. Renly and I will prepare the way. That said, the Lannisters may launch an assault the moment we seem divided. We must coordinate carefully. Stannis's fist pressed against the table. Then let us waste no more time. I will bring my army around to the eastern approach, near the Rosby Road. The Lannisters hold the western side, so your supply lines by sea remain open. I'll want my men in the city at dawn tomorrow. We'll set up a command within the Red Keep, ensuring order. From there, we can decide whether to sally forth against Jaime's lines or fortify the city until Tywin draws near. Ned agreed. I will dispatch messengers at once. We must avoid confusion at the gates. The Watchers will be told to let Baratheon men pass unchallenged once the signals are given. He dared to draw a breath that almost felt like hope. If Stannis truly abided by reason, they might unify in time to break the Lannister siege. Of course, the realm's acceptance of Stannis as king was another matter. But at least they would not be waging war on three fronts. A servant brought parchment, and Stannis dictated a curt note for the Watchers at King's Landing, ordering them to allow his forces entry by the dawn after next. Ned wrote his own letters to Renly and Ser Barristan, detailing the arrangement. At no point did Melisandre leave the tent's side. Occasionally, Ned felt her gaze upon him like a brand, though she spoke little more. He tried to mask his unease. The stories about her were full of dark hints, magic, prophecies, and the burning of idols. Stannis, for his part, treated her like an advisor of sorts, but also with a measure of caution in his voice. Ned sensed that not all was entirely harmonious in Stannis's retinue. When the documents were complete, Ned rose, tucking them carefully away. "We shall await you at the gates. May the gods, old or new, grant us success in putting an end to this strife." Stannis dipped his head in agreement, though his expression never softened. "The only gods that matter are those that grant victory, Lord Stark. Still, I expect we shall stand side by side soon enough." He paused. "I trust you'll bring my brother to heel if he has any ideas of usurping me. This kingdom cannot endure petty rivalries among Baratheons." "I believe Renly only wishes for the realm's safety," Ned answered. "He will see reason once he speaks with you." Stannis did not look entirely convinced, but he said no more. With a brief, cold nod, he saw Ned and Ser Roderick escorted back to the edge of the encampment. On the way out, Ned glanced at the faces of Stannis's men. Some were solemn, others bore fervent looks that verged on fanaticism. He wondered what whispered in their ears each night, what brand of fire Melisandre stoked in their hearts to make them kneel to this new red god. If it kept them loyal to Stannis and prevented further chaos, Ned was prepared to endure it. At last, he and Ser Roderick retrieved their horses and rode back, rejoining their retinue under the watchful eyes of the Lannister pickets. The air felt heavy with the approach of conflict. By the time they reached King's Landing, the sun was low, painting the sky with streaks of amber and pink. Ned did not delay, going straight to Renly in the Red Keep to share the news. Renly listened without speaking at first, pacing by a window that overlooked the courtyard. When Ned finished, the younger Baratheon pressed a hand to the sill, gazing out. "So he wants to be crowned right away. That's Stannis for you, no subtlety, no consideration for the hearts of the people, just the law hammered down. Still, I can abide it if it spares the city from bloodshed." Ned studied him quietly. "You once told me the realm might prefer you as king because you are more amiable, easier to love. Do you still harbor that thought?" Renly's lips tightened, and for a moment, his eyes flicked with unresolved emotion. Then he exhaled, stepping away from the window. "I had considered it, yes. But there is no sense in fracturing our forces now. I won't be the cause of more war. Robert is dead, and the realm needs unity. If you believe Stannis will not turn on me, I'll yield to his right of succession." Ned's posture eased in relief. "I'm glad to hear it. Our greatest foe stands outside these walls, wearing crimson and gold. Let us not do their work for them by quarreling." Renly rubbed a hand through his hair, shoulders tense. "We'll do it your way, Ned. Let Stannis enter the city. But if he tries to cow me or punish me for daring to defy his place in line, I'll not stand idle. Make certain he knows that." "Understood," Ned said quietly. "Now let us prepare for tomorrow. We'll need to coordinate with the gold cloaks so they don't loose arrows at the Baratheon men. I'll speak with Ser Barristan and the watch commanders. You handle your bannermen. Ensure they don't bristle at having to cede the city so soon." Renly straightened. "I'll see it done. Perhaps we can gather the lords in the throne room when Stannis arrives, so that all can witness him accept the crown in a formal ceremony. If he sees that the men are willing to bend the knee, he might show more gratitude." Ned nodded. "A good idea. Let's hope it soothes him. He's not a man known for warmth. But if we can at least keep him from wanting vengeance, the city might unite behind him." They parted to their tasks. Ned spent the rest of the evening calling upon the captains of the gold cloaks, ordering them to stand down at dawn from any hostility if they saw Baratheon soldiers near the gates. He used Stannis's letter as proof that this was no trick. Even so, some watchmen looked askance at the sudden shift in policy. Not long ago, they had seized the Red Keep against Joffrey's men. Now they were told to open the gates to another Baratheon. Ned stressed that the chain of command would remain, that the Watch would still defend the city from the Lannisters. A few grumbled, but none openly refused the order. Meanwhile, Ser Barristan oversaw the distribution of rations and ensured the men were fed enough to remain alert. The partial siege had strained food supplies. Merchants had begun to hoard grains, driving up prices. Ned mandated that some of the crown's remaining coin be used to buy stocks to feed the Watch. Littlefinger, lurking as always, expressed dismay at the expense. But for once he did not argue much. Perhaps he, too, saw that victory in the coming confrontation mattered more than a few chests of gold. Night fell, and the city was restless, an undercurrent of fear rippling through every district. Ned lay awake in his chamber, half dreaming of the old days when Robert's laughter echoed in the halls of Storm's End, when Stannis was only a solemn brother overshadowed by the Elder's vibrance. Now that vibrance was gone forever, replaced by the cold mathematics of war. Ned prayed they could still salvage the realm before more thousands died. At first light, horns sounded from the walls. Ned dressed quickly and made his way to the gates with Renly, Ser Barristan, and a company of knights. The portcullis was raised in stages, a clank of metal rattling across the yard. Outside, in the early gray dawn, a column of Baratheon soldiers approached. Their armor reflected the dim glow of sunrise, standards wafting overhead. Leading them was Stannis himself, mounted on a tall charger, the Red Woman at his side upon a pale mare. Behind them trailed lords and knights, among them the grim-faced knight Ned had met the day before. The gates swung fully open, and the Baratheon host began to enter, rank after rank, under the watchful eyes of the city's defenders. Ned and Renly moved forward. Stannis reined in his charger. For a moment, the two brothers regarded each other. Both wore the crown's stag emblem, though Stannis's burned with red flame. Renly's was a bright green stag against a field of gold. They had not seen each other in person since Robert's funeral ceremonies at King's Landing, back when Joffrey still claimed the throne. Now everything had changed. "Brother," Renly said quietly, inclining his head but not kneeling. "You come at last. We have kept the city for you, if you'll have it." Stannis dismounted stiffly, handing the reins to one of his knights. "You took your time deciding, Renly, but I suppose I should thank you for not turning the city into an inferno. I've no desire to butcher our own folk." Renly's jaw worked, and for a heartbeat, Ned feared the younger man might retort with something sharp. But he only said, "I do what I must for the realm. If that means stepping aside, so be it." Stannis acknowledged that with a clipped nod, as though it were the smallest courtesy possible. Then his eyes shifted to Ned. "Lord Stark, lead on. I'd see the Iron Throne and confirm that no Lannister sits upon it." Ned gestured for him to follow. The gates led into the wide streets near Flea Bottom and the stable district. The local small folk were already gathering, whispering at the sight of a new host of soldiers. Some even bowed or raised cheers for King Stannis, half in hope that this might mean an end to the siege. Others looked worried, unsure if a fresh wave of troops signaled a new assault on the city's meager resources. Melisandre rode near Stannis, silent, her eyes roving the assembled crowds. They made their way toward the Red Keep. Renly's knights joined them, forging a wedge of steel through the growing throng. The tension in the streets was palpable. But no violence erupted. People simply parted, casting uncertain glances. Soldiers wearing the gold cloaks lined the route at intervals, guarding against any panic. Ned sensed a small measure of relief. So far, everything was proceeding peaceably. At the gates of the Red Keep, the guards stepped aside, saluting. Up the massive steps they went, their boots echoing on stone. In the outer ward, more of Ned's men waited, watchful. Sansa and Arya were nowhere in sight, as Ned had ordered them to remain in safer quarters. This day was too unpredictable for them to stand among the throng. They passed into the great hall at last, a cavernous space where the Iron Throne loomed at the far end like a monstrous silhouette of twisted blades. Torches sputtered in their sconces, adding a smoky haze to the overhead gloom. A handful of lords and courtiers had assembled, uncertain whether to greet or fear Stannis' arrival. Littlefinger stood off to one side, face carefully arranged into mild deference, though his eyes flickered with cunning. Varys observed from behind a pillar, hands folded in his voluminous sleeves, his expression carefully composed. Ser Barristan led a few members of the Kingsguard, or what remained of them, to stand along the hall's perimeter, acknowledging Stannis with stoic bows. The City Watch officers, men loyal to Ned and Renly, lined the walls. Stannis strode in, boots thudding against the floor. Melisandre walked behind him, her red robes whispering over the stone. Renly and Ned took positions to one side, flanking him. The dais and the Iron Throne stood empty now, an echo of the boy who had once claimed it. Joffrey was locked away, and the seat seemed to brood in gloom, as though aware of the changing tides. For a moment all was still. Then Stannis ascended the dais step by step, his eyes fixed on the sword-forged mass of the throne. He circled it, passing a gauntlet hand over the jagged metal. Finally, he turned to face those assembled. His voice rang in the hush. "I am Stannis Baratheon, rightful king of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, by the law of succession and by the will of my late brother, King Robert." No one spoke. Those present hardly dared breathe. Ned lowered himself to one knee, bowing his head. He felt Renly kneel as well, though he imagined it cost the younger man a chunk of his pride. They were followed by lords and knights in a rustle of fabric and armor. Littlefinger, only a moment behind, dipped into a graceful bow, while Varys offered an elegant genuflection. Ser Barristan Selmy, proud in his white cloak, also knelt, offering fealty to the new king. Stannis surveyed them all with a mixture of stern approval and a hint of caution. He did not seat himself upon the throne yet. Instead, he turned to Ned. "You have done your duty, Lord Stark, holding this city against the Lannister corruption. Arise." Ned rose, meeting Stannis' gaze. "I place the regency in your hands, your grace. May you rule us justly, as Robert once hoped to rule." Stannis nodded sharply, then shifted his gaze to Renly. "Brother, arise as well." Renly stood, expression carefully neutral. "Your grace." For a moment Stannis said nothing, as if weighing 100 things. Then he announced, "As king, I hereby confirm that the boy Joffrey, along with Tommen and Myrcella, are to remain in custody until the matter of their lineage is proclaimed throughout the realm. Let it be known that any attempt to free them without my leave is an act of treason. The same applies to their mother, Cersei Lannister." The hall remained silent, no one daring to contradict him. Satisfied, Stannis continued, "We shall see justice done, but the war is not over. Tywin Lannister marches, and Jaime Lannister crouches like a viper outside these walls. We must unite our forces under one banner now. House Stark, House Baratheon of the Stormlands, and all the loyal lords who desire peace in the realm. I will accept fealty from any man who bends the knee and acknowledges me as king. Those who refuse shall be dealt with as rebels." Ned spoke up, voice level. "Your Grace, I have given orders to hold the walls. Jaime Lannister's men still hold the roads west of the city. We must decide whether to strike first or attempt negotiation." Stannis' jaw clenched. "I've already tried to send word that Joffrey is no true king. If the Lannisters had any sense, they'd withdraw. Yet they cling to the pretense that Cersei's children are Robert's. This is a deception we must shatter. Lord Stark, you know warfare well. Do you believe we can defeat Jaime in open battle with the forces we have?" Ned thought of the numbers. Renly's 2,000, plus the gold cloaks, plus Stannis' 8,000. "We might, if the men fight as one and if we do not face Tywin's arrival mid-battle. Our total might match or slightly exceed Jaime's. But if Tywin arrives early and joins with Jaime, we'll be hard-pressed." Stannis considered. "Then let us draw the Kingslayer into a fight before Tywin's reinforcements come. If we strike swiftly, we might break Jaime's siege lines. I have no love for cowering behind these walls while Tywin marches to encircle us. The realm must see that this new king is not afraid to take the field." Renly folded his arms. A bold gamble. If Jaime retreats to join Tywin, we still face them both in a larger confrontation. But it's preferable to letting them starve the city. Stannis turned a steely gaze on him. You spoke of your men's loyalty. Will they fight under my banner if I lead them in battle? Renly's expression flickered, but he nodded. They will, provided you treat them fairly. They followed me when we seized the city, but if I pledge my loyalty to you, they shall do the same. Stannis lifted his chin. Then so be it. Ser Barristan Selmy. The old knight rose, stepping forward. Your grace. Your reputation precedes you. You were once Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Will you serve as my commander here, to oversee the city's defenses while I lead the main force in the field? Ser Barristan did not hesitate. I will serve your grace if you command it. My life has been spent protecting the realm, no matter the occupant of the throne. Stannis inclined his head. Very well. Lord Stark, you know the city watch. I want you to ride with me. You have the trust of these men, and you know the Lannisters' cunning well enough. Renly, bring your knights as well. We march within 2 days if the omens are right. Ned did not miss the glance he gave Melisandre, who dipped her head slightly as though acknowledging that detail about omens. Ned schooled his expression to neutrality. I'll ready what men we can spare from the watch. The city needs a garrison, but enough can come with us to bolster your ranks. Stannis seemed satisfied. Then it's settled. I will send out scouts to locate Jaime's main camp. Once we know the lay of the land, we devise a plan to draw him into open combat. If the gods are just, we'll deliver a defeat that robs Tywin of his best commander. With that, the new king turned to the Iron Throne once more. For a tense moment, Ned wondered if he would seat himself now, or if he would wait for a formal coronation. Melisandre stood behind him, eyes glowing with a fervent light, but Stannis simply stepped closer, resting a hand on one jagged metal arm. The realm shall see justice at last, he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. Then he turned away, striding down from the dais. The watchers parted for him, and with Renly and Ned flanking him, he made his way out of the hall. The official crowning would come in time, but for now the city had a king in all but ceremony. That day and the next were a frenzy of preparation. Stannis established his seat of command in Robert's Old Solar, the same chamber once used to scheme or feast in simpler times. Melisandre often stood at a window, gazing at the sky or at the bay beyond. She spoke little to Ned, but whenever they crossed paths, he felt the weight of her regard. Meanwhile, Renly's knights grudgingly replaced their green-stitched banners with the flaming stag, an action some of them performed with ill-concealed resentment. Ned suspected certain lords had once hoped to see Renly crowned, but the reality of a combined front forced them to bend. Beyond the Red Keep, the city watched anxiously. Some folk cheered the arrival of a Baratheon who might drive off the Lannisters. Others muttered that this new king smelled of foreign gods and would bring misfortune on them. The bread riots had cooled somewhat with the arrival of more men. Stannis had brought supplies from Dragonstone, but tensions could flare again if the siege tightened. Ned ordered more grain distributed at fair prices, though it drained the treasury swiftly. Littlefinger scuttled around, claiming he would find fresh coin from the Iron Bank of Bravos if necessary, though Ned trusted him only as far as his word might last that particular hour. On the second day, King Stannis called for a war council in the Tower of the Hand, where Ned had once tried to piece together the mystery of Joffrey's parentage. The Iroh. New York was not lost on him as he stood around the same table, now in the service of a different Baratheon. Renly was there, along with Ser Barristan, Ser Roderick, and half a dozen highborn knights loyal to Stannis. Among them Lord Valerion, a thin, solemn man, and Lord Celtigar, who fiddled nervously with the ring on his finger. Stannis commanded the room with curt instructions. They had scout reports that Jaime Lannister's camp was arrayed near the Gold Road, close to the western gate. The Kingslayer had no more than 6,000 men, good cavalry, but fewer foot soldiers. He had started to dig in, building palisades and shallow trenches, perhaps waiting for Tywin. Meanwhile, the watchers on the city walls had seen Lannister foraging parties harass local farms. Stannis's brow furrowed as he surveyed the sketches of Jaime's positions. If we wait for Tywin, we'll be outnumbered 2-1 or worse. Our best chance is to strike at Jaime's lines, force a battle quickly. If we succeed in routing him, we might take him captive or at least drive him off. That would be a mighty blow to the Lannisters' cause. Renly pointed to the rough map. He's near the north bank of the Blackwater. If we come out of the King's Gate and cross the river upstream, we could flank him. Lord Valerion disagreed. But if his outriders see us coming, they'll adjust. The crossing is shallow in places, but not enough for a large force to pass swiftly. We could be caught in the water if he attacks. Ser Barristan tapped the table with a gauntlet finger. Better to sally straight from the western gate, form up in the open field, and confront him head-on. Jaime is a bold fighter, but if we show strong numbers, he might be forced to retreat or risk a pitched battle. And in that case, the father in him might also worry for the safety of Cersei and the children inside the city. Ned watched as Stannis weighed the options. Jaime would not be a simple foe to scare away. He was skilled in war and known for reckless courage. If cornered, he might attempt a daring assault on their flank. We could send a small company north of the Blackwater to feign a crossing, Ned suggested. Force Jaime to dispatch men there. Meanwhile, the bulk of our force exits the western gate to face him. If we catch him off balance, we stand a better chance. A two-pronged maneuver might confuse him. Stannis rubbed the stubble on his jaw. That may work if we coordinate timing carefully. I'll lead the main host out the western gate at dawn. Renly, you can command the smaller company for the feint, crossing in the night so the Lannisters spot you come morning. That might draw off part of their forces. As soon as we see them shift, we attack in strength. Renly nodded, though Ned sensed some reluctance. Perhaps the younger brother disliked being given a diversionary role. Still, he inclined his head. Yes, Your Grace. I'll see it done. They spent the next hours finalizing details. How many knights, how many foot, the composition of the gold cloak units, and how to signal from the far bank. By the time they adjourned, the men had a plan. Victory was far from certain, but it was better than waiting for the hammer of Tywin's full host to fall on them. That evening, Ned found a moment of quiet in the castle Godswood. The air was cool under the rustling leaves of the weirwood, though no carved face adorned it here, as in the ancient Godswoods of the north. He knelt by the pool, drawing a hand through the still water. Memories of Winterfell crowded his mind. The crisp snow, the muffled hush of the wolfswood, the stone walls that had sheltered his family for generations. Sorrow welled in him. He thought of Robb so far away, bearing a burden beyond his years. He prayed that the boy had not marched south yet, or if he had, that he would find safe passage. The war was tearing the Seven Kingdoms in all directions. A faint footstep made Ned turn. Ser Barristan approached, his white cloak trailing. He carried his helmet under one arm. Beneath the silver hair and lined face, Barristan still projected a quiet strength. "My lord," he said in a gentle tone, "I did not mean to disturb you." Ned rose, wiping his damp hand on his cloak. "No disturbance, Ser Barristan. I was just remembering the north." Barristan gave a faint smile. "We never forget our true homes, do we? Mine was Harvest Hall, yet I've not seen it in many a year. Kings and wars kept me away." He let out a sigh that carried old regrets. "But we do our duty." Ned answered softly. Duty and honor were all that carried him now. "Do you truly believe Stannis can restore peace?" Barristan hesitated. "He is lawful, that much is certain. He'll not be easily swayed by flattery or bribes. He lacks Robert's warmth, but perhaps that is what the realm needs now. A stern ruler who holds men accountable. Yet I fear the road to that peace might be lined with corpses." Ned nodded, gazing at the reflection of the red leaves in the water. "We can only do our best to minimize them." They stood in silence for a moment, the hush of the gods would settling around them like a veil. Then Barristan cleared his throat. "Tomorrow we march. I came to wish you good fortune if we find ourselves in battle. I suspect we'll stand side by side." "Thank you, Ser Barristan. Good fortune to you as well." I can think of no finer knight at my back." He placed a hand on the old knight's shoulder. "May the gods protect us both." The night passed in restless anticipation. Ned tried to sleep, but his dreams were vivid. He saw the trident again, Robert's warhammer crashing down on Rhaegar Targaryen's breastplate, rubies scattering in bloody water. Then he saw Jaime Lannister standing amid corpses in the throne room. The Mad King's blood pooled on the floor. Shifting images of a shadow with a sword of flame haunted him, and in the last moment, he saw Arya and Sansa alone in a dark corridor, calling his name. He woke in a sweat, heart pounding, and found the first light of dawn creeping through the shutters. He dressed quickly in full armor, layering the steel carefully. Ser Roderick arrived to accompany him down to the courtyard, where hundreds of men were already gathering by torch and lantern. Banners fluttered in the pre-dawn breeze. Stannis arrived shortly, wearing plate black as night, the flaming stag upon his breast, sword belted at his side. Renly approached from another direction, leading a band of knights who wore the gold and green stag but had pinned a small badge of the new sigil over their hearts. The two brothers exchanged curt greetings. They split the armies as planned. Renly took 800 men, mostly cavalry, to circle north of the Blackwater, hoping to create enough of a diversion. Stannis led the main force out the western gate with Ned, Ser Barristan, Ser Roderick, and the bulk of the men behind him. The gold cloaks marched at the center in orderly ranks, their cloaks shifting as the faint sunrise tinted the sky. Drums and horns signaled their departure. The people of King's Landing lined the streets in silence, watching the soldiers depart. Some looked hopeful, as if seeing these knights ride out to rid them of the Lannister blockade was a blessing. Others bore haunted expressions, knowing how easily battles could turn into disasters. Ned glimpsed a mother clutching a babe, tears tracing her cheeks. He wished he could promise safety. All he could offer was a last, grave nod before turning his eyes forward. They exited the city. The farmland beyond had been ravaged by raids. Smoke rose from a few burnt barns, though small folk had taken refuge behind the walls. Stannis set a brisk pace along the road, wanting to reach a field suitable for forming battle lines. Scouts galloped ahead, scanning the terrain. Behind them rumbled supply wagons, carrying extra arrows, spare lances, and provisions for a day's campaign. Melisandre rode near Stannis at first, but soon she peeled away to speak with some of his knights, her red robes striking against the dusty road. Before noon, the columns arrived at a broad expanse of open ground near where the Lannisters had dug in. Jaime's pickets spotted them almost immediately, and horns sounded from the Lannister lines. Men in crimson cloaks scrambled to position. It was quickly apparent that Jaime had a well-chosen defensive spot, shallow trenches fronted by sharpened stakes. The ground was not as even as Ned would have liked, scattered with rocks and brush, but it was workable. The sky overhead was pale with puffy clouds, the sun not too strong, which might spare the men from heat exhaustion. Stannis reined in, raising an arm. The ranks behind him halted, a ripple of metallic clinks rolling through the lines. Ned pulled his horse up beside the king. Ahead, across the field, they could see figures on horseback wearing Lannister armor. One, shining in gilded plate, was surely Jaime Lannister. The Kingslayer sat astride a warhorse, flanked by banners depicting the Golden Lion on crimson. Behind him, lines of archers, pikemen, and cavalry formed into disciplined blocks. Stannis' voice was low and taut. "He's daring us to come at him." Ned nodded. "We expected that. If Renly's plan succeeds, a portion of Jaime's men might peel away to confront the crossing. We must be ready to seize that moment." The men dismounted to form lines or readied themselves in the cavalry ranks. Drums pounded. Ned found himself at the head of a large block of foot soldiers, including many gold cloaks, their halberds catching the midday light. He felt the swirl of tension in the air, that keen edge before a battle. He tested his sword's hilt, checking that it was secure. His heart thumped with the old, familiar dread that always came before the storm. King Stannis rode slowly along the front, shouting commands. He stationed archers on the flanks, readied the cavalry to his right. Melisandre stood on a small rise behind the lines, arms raised, as though praying to her strange god. Some men eyed her uneasily, while others roared in approval. At last, Stannis returned to the center, near Ned. "We'll wait until we see sign of Renly's approach across the river. Then we press forward. If Jaime tries to attack first, we hold formation." Ned gave a short nod. "Yes, Your Grace." Part of him wished he had chosen a simpler life, away from wars and thrones. Yet here he was, once again, risking all for the realm's uncertain future. Minutes stretched into an hour, each side glaring across the field, archers occasionally loosing a stray arrow to test range. Lannister outriders circled to watch for any movement. Ned prayed Renly had managed to slip his men across the shallows in time. A hush fell, broken only by the ragged breathing of thousands of men. They were close enough that Ned could see Jaime's golden hair shining in the sunlight whenever a breeze caught his helm's plume. Then, from the north, the faint sound of shouting. Distant horns. The Lannisters in that direction stirred, glancing away from the main lines. A rider galloped up to Jaime. The Kingslayer leaned over, listening to something the rider said. Jaime's posture stiffened. Clearly, the diversion had begun. Ned spotted movement among the Lannister ranks. They were sending a detachment of men north, possibly 1,000 or more, to hold the crossing. That might be enough for Renly to fix them in place without risking a full confrontation. Stannis raised his sword high. "Now!" His voice carried. Drums thundered, and the Baratheon lines began to advance at a steady march. The cavalry on the right flank moved forward in a wave of hooves. Banners whipped in the wind. Across the field, Jaime reacted swiftly. He repositioned a portion of his cavalry to the left, presumably to meet Stannis's. The archers behind the Lannister stakes readied arrows. A volley whistled through the air, darkening the sky for a heartbeat. Ned shouted, "Shields!" His men raised wooden or metal shields, and the arrows clattered against them, a few finding gaps. Cries erupted as men went down. Still the line pushed on. Ned advanced in the front rank, sword in hand, adrenaline burning away all fear. He heard Ser Roderick's voice urging the men on, saw gold cloaks pressing forward with halberds, driving back Lannister scouts. Closer they came to the trenches and stakes. The plan was to push across swiftly and break Jaime's line before it stabilized. A second volley of arrows whined overhead, but fewer found targets as Ned's archers returned fire, striking Lannister bowmen. The first clash came when the Baratheon foot reached the stakes. Some men hacked at them with axes, creating gaps for the halberdiers to thrust through. Others used hooked pikes to yank the sharpened stakes aside. Ned stepped over a fallen shield, scanning for Jaime. The Kingslayer remained astride his horse, deeper in the formation, commanding a cavalry wing that now thundered around the edge to flank Stannis's knights. Ned glimpsed the Baratheon cavalry slamming into the Lannisters' flank, steel on steel in a cacophony. The ground shook with the impact of hundreds of horses. Gritting his teeth, Ned urged his men forward, deeper into the fray. The Lannister foot soldiers rushed to defend the trenches, swords and spears flashing. Shouts mingled with screams. A Lannister spearman lunged at Ned, who sidestepped and brought his sword down in a clean slash. Another man closed in from the side, but a gold cloak tackled him. The lines dissolved into smaller pockets of fighting, men stepping over bodies and broken stakes. Smoke drifted from a small fire ignited by a stray torch near the brush. Somewhere near the center, Ned heard Stannis's battle cry, a voice of iron leading the men. The king fought in the vanguard, hammering away with a sword that gleamed in the sunlight, though it lacked the brilliance of the famed Lightbringer from legends. Lannister soldiers recoiled from his ferocity, but a handful stood their ground. Behind Ned, more Baratheon men flooded in. He risked a glance back. The line was still intact, surging around the obstacles. They were taking losses, but so were the Lannisters. If they could only break their center, Jaime's position would crumble. A sudden roar of hooves to Ned's right made him pivot. A wedge of Lannister cavalry broke through a line of archers, galloping hard. Their aim was to slam into the Baratheon foot from the flank. Ned shouted for men to form a shield wall, but it was chaos, men stumbling over the dead. The cavalry bore down, lances leveled. Ned braced, lifting his shield, expecting to be crushed. At the last instant, an answering thunder of hooves crashed in from the opposite side. Stannis' cavalry reserve, led by a knight in golden armor with the flaming stag etched upon it. The two cavalry wedges collided in a storm of lances and shrieking horses. Ned dove aside, narrowly missing a trampling hoof. He hit the ground, breath knocked out, but no lance found him. He staggered up, a ringing in his ears. Bodies littered the ground. Dust choked the air. He saw one Lannister knight pinned under his horse, screaming. Then Ser Rodrik was there, hauling Ned upright. "My lord, are you hurt?" Ned gasped for air, shook his head. "I'm all right. Keep pushing forward." He coughed, trying to clear his lungs. Then he steadied himself, blinking sweat from his eyes. "Stannis!" Rodrik's gaze flicked across the melee. "He was there. He's leading the men into the center. I can't see him now." They pushed onward. Ned found himself battling a cluster of Lannister spearmen. The gold cloaks behind him had formed a ragged line. Shouts of "Stark" and "For the King" rose above the din. Each swing of Ned's sword felt heavier than the last, but he forced himself to persist, cutting through the confusion. Blood sprayed across his gauntlet. His shoulder ached with the impact of a glancing spear. Around him, men fell screaming or died in silence. The stench of gore and churned earth seeped into every breath. To the north, horns sounded again. Renly's men must have engaged the detachment Jaime had sent. Ned prayed that was going well. If Renly could drive them away, perhaps they'd rejoin the main battle and tip the scales. Then, a fresh wave of Lannister soldiers arrived, evidently reserves from behind the palisades. They charged, weapons glittering. Ned's group braced, though half of them were wounded or exhausted. Suddenly, from behind Ned, a roar of voices surged. A relief force. At its head galloped Stannis Baratheon, helmet lost, his face set in a grim mask. Melisandre rode behind him, her red robes flying like a banner, though she bore no weapon. Stannis bellowed, "For the true king, drive them back." His men collided with the Lannister reserves. The clang of steel on steel resonated with savage force. The Lannister line wavered, pressed on two sides. Their discipline faltered. Jaime Lannister himself appeared on the other side of the throng, golden armor spattered with blood. He hacked down a Baratheon knight and spurred his horse toward Stannis, as though seeking to end the fight in single combat. Stannis saw him and shouted a challenge, but a swirl of soldiers blocked their meeting, each side's men tangling them up. Jaime wheeled his horse, trying to clear a path, while Stannis battered aside two Lannister pikemen. Ned tried to close the gap, but was stopped by a press of fleeing men. One Lannister soldier nearly bowled him over in a desperate scramble to retreat. All at once, the Lannisters in the center broke. Some turned and ran for the partial safety of the trenches. Others tried to form a last pocket of resistance. Shouts of "Retreat" rippled through their ranks. The once formidable line splintered. Jaime Lannister cursed audibly, swinging wildly at any Baratheon soldier who approached. Then, with a final, seething glare toward Stannis, he jerked his horse's reins and galloped away, flanked by his knights. They rode west, scattering any who dared block them. Stannis urged the pursuit, but the newly fallen palisades slowed the cavalry. Some Baratheon riders vaulted over the stakes, continuing the chase in a pounding thunder of hooves. Others remained to secure the field. Bodies lay in heaps. Groans and screams filled the air. Ned found himself staring at the carnage, the swirl of dust and blood. He realized, with a hollow sense of relief, that they had won the field. The Lannisters were in retreat, and King's Landing was, for the moment, free from this immediate threat. Stannis, breathing hard, reined in next to Ned. The king's hair clung to his brow with sweat and spatters of blood. "They're pulling back," he growled. "But I doubt they'll run far." Jaime might attempt to regroup. His voice was hoarse. He glanced at Ned. "We must press the advantage. Secure the area, gather the wounded. Barristan. Where is Ser Barristan?" Ned scanned the field. Ser Barristan appeared, leaning on a battered shield, helmet dangling from one hand. Blood streaked his white cloak. Yet he was upright, which was more than could be said for many. Ned gestured to him, and the old knight limped over. Despite his pain, he offered Stannis a respectful bow. "We have them on the run, your grace, but we must reorganize. Should we pursue deeper?" Stannis considered. "A measured pursuit. Send a vanguard to keep them from reforming too quickly. The rest will tend to the wounded and fortify. Once we know the extent of Jaime's retreat, we'll decide if we press on or return to the city. We have men at the crossing with Renly as well. We'll want to coordinate with him." His eyes swept the field again, flicking from one cluster of casualties to another. "We've paid in blood for this day, but it seems we have victory." Ned's limbs felt leaden, but he squared his shoulders. "Aye, your grace. I'll see to the wounded. We should mark which ones are ours and which are Lannisters. The wounded from both sides might be questioned or ransomed. We can also gather any who might swear fealty rather than starve or bleed out." Stannis grunted. "Yes, show them that I reward loyalty, but traitors who stand defiant will find no quarter." He paused, meeting Ned's eyes. "But do not let them say I butcher the helpless, Stark. See to it." Ned bowed his head. "I will." Stannis spurred his horse away, barking orders at the men. Melisandre followed, her expression serene amid the horror, like a crimson wraith drifting through the wounded. Ned suppressed a shiver at the sight. He turned to Ser Roderick, who was helping a wounded gold cloak hobble forward. The knight's face lit with relief that Ned yet lived. Ned nodded wearily. "Come, let's do what we can. Then we'll send riders to find Renly. The day is not done." They spent hours in the aftermath, collecting the fallen, applying bandages, sorting the living from the dead. The stench thickened as the sun climbed higher. Vultures circled overhead, drawn by the carnage. Ned tried not to dwell on the heavy toll. He knew battles from the rebellion, but the familiarity did not ease the weight on his heart. Around midday, word reached them that Renly's diversion had succeeded. He had clashed with a Lannister force near the shallows, driving them off, then retreated once Jaime's line collapsed. Now he approached from the north with minimal losses. Not all were so lucky. Many of Stannis's men had died, splayed out on the battered ground. The Lannisters had lost heavily as well, leaving behind their dead and wounded as they fled west. Jaime's personal guard had managed a breakout, apparently. There was no sign of the Kingslayer himself among the captives. Some knights cursed that they had not managed to corner and kill him. Others whispered that it might have been best to take him alive and force Tywin's hand. Late in the day, Renly finally arrived to merge with the main force. He and Stannis greeted each other stiffly, but there was no open argument. They conferred for a short time, each giving accounts of the day. Both recognized that Tywin still loomed in the distance, and the war was hardly over. But they had struck a blow that might buy them breathing space. When the sun dipped low, Stannis ordered a return to King's Landing with as many men as could be spared to escort the wounded. Patrols were left behind to watch for any resurgence of Lannister troops. Ned rode in the rearguard, ensuring none were left behind. By the time they reached the city gates, darkness had fallen. The people let out a ragged cheer to see their soldiers returning in victory, but many faces fell when they saw the stretch of wounded wagons, the battered men with limping gaits. Within the Red Keep, the corridors bustled with frantic activity, maesters and healers rushing to treat the injured. Sansa and Arya ran to Ned's side the moment he arrived, each clinging to an arm. Arya's eyes shone with relief, and Sansa fought tears, seeing the blood on his armor. Ned tried to reassure them he was unhurt, that the blood was not all his. He embraced them both, feeling the day's burden ease just a little in their presence. Elsewhere, Stannis retreated to the privacy of the Royal Solar, presumably to consult with Melisandre or to plan the next steps. Renly's men took up a portion of the courtyard, silent with exhaustion. Another day had passed in the forging of a new rule, the forging of a new war. Even with Jaime beaten for the moment, Tywin's great host still threatened from afar. The realm was not yet safe, and Ned knew well that every victory might be undone by a single turn of fate. That night, the Red Keep's halls lay quiet but for the moans of the wounded. Ned managed a few hours of sleep, haunted by the images of the battlefield. When he woke, his leg ached fiercely, stiff from exertion. He forced himself to stand, remembering that he was no longer protector but an ally to a sitting king, albeit one crowned by the law more than by popular acclaim. The realm was fracturing, with Tywin in the west, Robb mustering in the north, and the River Lords under siege from another Lannister force. And somewhere beyond it all, the shape of more storms brewed. Old rumors of dragons in the east, fleeting talk of Balon Greyjoy stirring in the Iron Islands. Outside, dawn broke once again. A new day in King's Landing, with a new king upon the Iron Throne, if Stannis dared sit it. Ned donned a simpler doublet, wincing at his bruises. He made his way to the balcony overlooking the yard. Soldiers bustled in the early light, distributing bread, washing mud-stained surcoats. The city beyond the walls stirred. Bells tolled in a distant sept for the dead. Above the harbor, gulls wheeled in a pale sky. It felt like a calm after a storm, and yet Ned sensed only the hush of a deeper tempest yet to come. He closed his eyes, remembering Robert's laughter in days long gone, remembering how they had once believed victory would bring peace. Perhaps that had been a naive dream, or perhaps it was a dream that still might live if they persevered. Ned Stark, battered in body but unbroken in spirit, whispered a silent vow to the old gods that he would see this through. If Stannis Baratheon proved a worthy king, then so be it. If war still raged on, he would fight to keep the realm from falling into ruin. In that moment, with the morning wind lifting his hair, Eddard Stark felt the burdens of the kingdom settle more heavily than ever upon him. Yet he stood tall. He was a wolf of the north, and though the Game of Thrones had drawn him into its lethal labyrinth, he would not falter. The final outcome lay far beyond this single victory, in a tapestry of alliances, betrayals, and unforeseen forces. But for now, the city breathed. The Iron Throne had a new occupant, and an uneasy hope flickered in the dawn's light. If that hope could carry them all through the trials to come, perhaps the Seven Kingdoms would yet endure, and the House of Stark along with it.